Well, now we at least have a quorum.
You got 1 minute.
Yeah.
Your clock's fast though.
Well, it hasn't finished doing the 6 songs yet. There we go. And I have 6 o'clock. All right, we do have a quorum. So with that, I'll go ahead and call this special meeting of City Council, Council Roundtable to session. Tonight we're focused on, again, continuing the council's budget work plan. Tonight's focus is on continuing the discussions around the non-utility CIP or capital improvement plan. And we'll start, I believe Jody is here. Jody, if you could take the roll call, please.
Absolutely. Councilmember James.
Here.
Councilmember Ross.
Here.
Councilmember Holloway.
Here.
I see him. Councilmember Holloway.
Here.
Councilmember Mayhew.
Here.
Councilmember Lassay.
Here.
Councilmember Sundwall.
Here.
Councilmember Shepherd.
Here.
And Mayor Larson.
I am here. Thank you, Jody. Okay, so with that, I'll turn it over to Drew, who's actually going to kick off the presentation tonight, I believe. So I'll turn it over to Drew.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Good evening, council members. My name is Drew, and I am the financial analyst for the city of Snoqualmie. First, before getting into this presentation, I'd like to take a moment to thank the Parks and Public Works Department and Community Development Department for their incredible effort in support of the CIP. Furthermore, I would also like to thank the mayor, city administrator, Mayor Pro Tem, and you council for your guidance, input, and feedback throughout the CIP development process, including the budget roundtable last week. Now, before getting into the table sent out last Friday, I'd like to describe some work and events that have transpired since the non-utility CIP was adopted in September of last year. First, the city believes realistically that we can complete 5 projects this year. This includes the City Hall Annex project, Noon Street Sidewalk Addition project, Stellar Way Tree Replacement project, and the 2 pedestrian signal projects. Consequently, we will no longer need to budget for these items in this updated non-utility CIP. Second, the updated non-utility CIP incorporates new information that has emerged since last year. One source comes from project management staff, who after discussions with internal stakeholders and vendors have revised project scopes and if necessary, updated project cost estimates. The other source of information has been experienced by all here. Both the COVID-19 situation and the dissolution of the Salish development has reduced the anticipated capital funding available in upcoming years. Third, and as a consequence of this new information, staff have had to realign spending expectations with the anticipated funding available. This has required the deferral or shifting of some projects to outside the upcoming 2021 through 2022 biennium. Next slide. Next, and due to council feedback, staff re-examined the proposed magnitude of capital program spending. Given the pavement management plan presented to the Parks and Public Works Committee last Tuesday, the city was able to update cost estimates for both the street resurfacing and Snoqualmie Parkway rehabilitation programs, which came in lower than previous expectations. Furthermore, and given recent experience, such as the replacement of sidewalk panels or the Koinonia Park playground replacement, the city was able to eliminate any unneeded amounts set aside for design or construction management services. This is largely due to the expected simplicity of some of the work required, which can be handled in-house. In addition, the city trimmed back several programs to occur every other year. For example, replacing a playground or conducting trail maintenance every 2 years instead of 1. Next, the city added a facilities maintenance program to ensure that city facilities such as City Hall, the fire station, and the police station are properly maintained. In the past, a lot of the facilities maintenance work completed has been one-offs and incorporated into the budget here. The establishment of a program allows the city to set aside a certain amount of funding annually to ensure consistent work. Next slide, please. Finally, the city has retooled the table a bit to add a capital projects with grant funding approved category. This category has been shaded yellow in the table. And the purpose of this category is to call out projects where grant funding has already been approved. Moreover, the city has added a capital projects awaiting grant approval category, shaded orange, to call out projects where grant funding has yet to be approved. The completion of projects within this category is contingent upon receiving the grant funds applied for. Last but not least, the city, in this uncertain environment, doesn't quite know about the timing or the details of the community and its potential expansion, and therefore has removed an assumption about debt service. All right, James, could you take us to the table, please? All right, so next I'd like to review the table briefly. The table is primarily broken up into two main separate blocks: estimated sources and estimated uses. Furthermore, these sources and uses are projected across 4 columns: 2021, 2022, 2023 through 2026, and a total for the 6-year period. The first 2 columns, 2021 and 2022, is where the city hopes to focus most of your time and attention. These 2 columns represent what the city proposes to incorporate into the upcoming biennial budget. Under the estimated sources banner, the city recommends earmarking several taxes for the CIP. This includes the motor vehicle fuel tax, otherwise known as the gas tax, the TBD vehicle fee, multimodal transportation tax, real estate excise tax, the excess property tax levy, which is used to pay down debt service on the fire station bond, non-reoccurring sales tax, and a portion of the utility tax. Moreover, the city will supplement these taxes with other sources such as grants approved and pending, the King County Parks levy, donations, and other increases yet to be determined. This last row, undetermined increases, represents potential sources that require further council discussion and direction. Options the council could consider include state grants, fundraising, a bond, or others. Under the estimated uses banner, the city has differentiated between capital programs, which represents the annual preservation of currently built assets, capital projects with grant funding approved, capital projects awaiting grant approval, future capital project needs, and debt service on assets already built. Capital programs, colored green, includes money set aside for the preservation and resurfacing of the street network, including the Snoqualmie Parkway, the replacement of sidewalk panels, replacement of playground equipment, the continuing maintenance of critical facilities, and others. The city anticipates spending an average of $1.85 million annually on capital programs over the 6-year period. Capital projects with grant funding approved includes the Riverfront Land Acquisitions and Demolitions Project, Riverwalk Phase 1, and the Sandy Cove Improvement Project. While collectively the total cost of this section is $4.9 million, the city portion of the total cost is approximately $2.5 million, or slightly over half. Not shown in the table is the amount of money already spent on said projects. Using various sources, the city has spent approximately $2.2 million between the Riverfront Land Acquisitions and Demolitions Project and Riverwalk Phase 1. Capital projects awaiting grant approval includes the Meadowbrook Trail Project and the All-Inclusive Playground Project. Council approved grant applications for both projects in May of this year, and the completion of each project is contingent upon receiving the grant, which will not be known until next year. The next category, future capital project needs, represents an amount the city will likely need to aim for in capital project spending after the upcoming biennium. The city is currently non-committal as to what projects should be included in this category, and it is recommended that council focus on its delineation later, possibly at a future retreat. Last of the estimated uses is debt service, which represents the amount the city pays back annually for the construction of the fire station, city hall, and some past street projects. Finally, the table includes an estimate of our ending CIP cash balance, revealing how the city's cash position of capital restricted or committed funds will change over the next 6-year period. And that's it. Thank you very much for your time, council members, and I would like to open up the floor to questions or comments you may have. Thank you. I think we have a hand up, so Councilmember Shepherd.
Yeah, my concern is that we have about $15 million between 2023 and 2026 for future capital project needs with nothing delineated. And I would not vote for anything that has something that's not delineated.
Again, Councilmember Shepherd, as we spoke of the last roundtable meeting, you've been provided that list on 2, if not 3 occasions in the past, and the council was asked to go back and review all the items on that red list in preparation for tonight. Councilmember Lassay. You're muted, Matt. There we go.
Yeah, I'm of the same opinion as Councilmember Shepherd. The way this was just explained was we're asking council to approve $14.8 million for projects that will be decided upon later. If that means all of the items in red from the previous listing, then we should list them all here. If it doesn't mean all the items in red, then we should delineate which ones are included in that 14.8. I am not inclined to spend taxpayer dollars on future needs unless those needs are delineated in the CIP.
Matt, did you still have more questions or more comments, or your hand is still up? Councilmember Ross.
I'm curious about the total cash, let's see, the ending balance in 2022, we'll have about 13 million. And that's carried on to the next, for the next 3 years, or 4 years, I guess. But I also see that the community center expansion is not included anywhere in this. And so why would we carry forward the 13 million? And why isn't the community center expansion included? Because this project is one that we've had a town hall on, we've had a survey on, and there's a lot of residents that really want to see it.
There's no question about that. 2 issues. One is, as council may recall, this was exactly what we discussed at the last roundtable meeting, which was the fact that, in this, we've had 2 major paradigm shifts in the last several months, and that one was the 4th quarter of 2019 with the loss of the Salish expansion, potential loss of TBD revenues, which we're still reflecting here with the caveat of the bold noting that, hey, this is tenuous. And then we immediately moved into the first part of the first quarter of 2020, hitting the COVID crisis. So we were losing up to 35% of our projected revenues in our non-utility CIP list. So the thinking was to at least commit to, particularly everything in the green, the programs of existing infrastructure. No, we could do that. The only nuances here that maybe makes it sound like all sorts of Christmas tree ornaments are being hung on to this now is, as we went back responding to council feedback from the last roundtable, was recognizing that, hey, we do have some problem on certain projects or items that are already in motion where considerable dollars are at risk. For example, on the Riverwalk, there's upward, in excess of $700,000 in grants that we were awarded, but we will not be paid that grant until we hit certain milestones. So if we were to abandon those milestones, we've been paying all the costs of consultants and everything up to this point, and we will not get reimbursed those costs unless we, complete those milestones to fulfill the grant requirements. And so we could be exposed to considerable loss there and not a savings. And so that's why we added that yellow and red, the yellow and orange area there. The salmon color on the red hasn't changed. It was the same that we thought the council concurred with last time. And that was, look, just like with the operational budget, we live in a highly fluid situation where we don't know if it's going to be an ongoing recession that will last for several years or several months. And so before making any drastic decisions on all those other capital projects, we'll push them outside of the window, the 2-year window. And all council is approving on a $14.8 million is just acknowledging of those projects. That's roughly what the cost is. It's not approving anything, and all the details have to come back for the council's approval. As will, we said, our thought was to add this as an agenda item in our retreat going into the first 2021 and revisit a lot of that red list and hopefully have a little more better handle on maybe where the economy is going at that time. Councilor Mayhew, did you? Oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Ross, did you want to follow up?
Well, so then it sounds like it's flexible that we could potentially pull some of the projects in if the outlook is looking, if things turn around.
Absolutely, yeah, that's the thinking. Councilor Mayhew?
Yeah, so I think Councilmember Shepherd and Councilmember Lassay have some are sharing some thoughts that I have, or let me put it, I share some thoughts that I think they have. So the challenge, as I see it, is how do we kind of get from where we're sitting right now to an approved non-utility CIP for the next 6 years. So that's our goal. And the question is, how much time is that going to take us to accomplish? So what they're showing us here is that the CIP we passed a year ago, we can't afford anything close to that. There's simply no resources. So we've got some tough decisions to make. How are we going to react to that? What are we going to do about that? And so the idea here, and this is what we talked about 2 weeks ago, is what if we took everything that we do in non-utility CIP, I'm just going to call that CIP for now. We'll talk about utilities, of course, later. But in this CIP, and similar to how we all went through it a year ago when we had, I've forgotten I keep forgetting his name, the guy that we had here for Parks and Public Works for a while, that helped us put this together last year.
Ben Yazishi.
Ben, who I thought did a fantastic job for us. Here's what we've kind of focused in on, and this is kind of the difference between programs and projects. So programs are those ongoing things we have to do, and that's what's all the stuff in the green. So we have to resurface our streets, we have to resurface the parkway, we have to rebuild sidewalks and so forth. We have to refresh our playgrounds and parks. So those are the things that we have to do ongoing year after year after year. And so Snoqualmie's really never thought about this for 20 years in this way, because we were on a massive growth trajectory. So we're getting new parks all the time. We're getting new streets all the time, but they were brand new. They weren't going to need to be resurfaced for 15, 20 years. The parks were new. They weren't going to have to be redone for that kind of time frame. Well, 15, 20 years is now, and we're done building out. So now we have to have a CIP that lasts, that everything gets renewed on cycle, and we have enough money to do that. And so the idea here is, well, let's start with the green stuff, the programs, the ongoing stuff that we have to do. Let's make sure we've got enough revenue to cover that. Then let's see, after we've covered that, what do we have left to do? Projects. These are new things that we don't already have. It's not just taking care of what we already have. That's building something new. A river walk, improving Sandy Cove Park, for example, to something that has never been before. Building an all-inclusive playground, for example. Building a significantly expanded community center that can handle the size community we've become. Those kind of ideas. So the way I look at this is, if we sort of break this down into chunks, what we can do is get through a chunk now that allows us to give direction to administration to go put together a biennial budget, 2 years. For the next 2 years, here's what we want to see in the biennial budget. And as far as projects go, say, you know what? For now, we're not going to approve any projects, except for maybe a few there in yellow and salmon color. The rest, we're going to need to go back and do exactly what I think Councilmember Shepherd was saying, Councilmember Lassay was saying, which is we're going to have to sort of hash out, what is our project list going to actually look like? So I think that what administration has done here is said, okay, we're gonna recommend taking a bunch of projects off and lower the total project for the 6 years to that 14.8 million. They've got a set of projects they're gonna put in front of us that equal that. And even doing that, so a lot of those projects are one-off deals. So we're gonna take one-off money, which is sitting in our cash balance, which is built up from one-off sources like the taxes, the construction sales tax during the time that the bridge was being built out, and that was all set aside by councils for these kind of one-time projects. So what they're saying, what they're proposing to us tonight is, if we can sign off for them that we want the green stuff done at that level, and that overall we're okay with this approach, then they'll go put together a proposal for us for the biennial budget so we can get that done on time, with the idea, folks, we may not be able to get to the bottom of that red list until February at our retreat. Maybe sooner, maybe it takes us a little bit longer. Maybe we can get a few years at that point. We'll see. There's a lot of hard work and a lot of priorities we're gonna have to sort of sort out. But can we give them enough to go create a biennial budget for us? And so notice that red is all outside of the biennial period. So they're asking us to sign off on guidance. This isn't the CIP. They're going to need to bring us a CIP, but it's going to take a little bit longer. But this lets them do the biennial budget portion of that, is the idea. So hopefully, I didn't talk too long. Hopefully that was clarifying as to the approach that I thought we sort of asked them to do 2 weeks ago. It certainly makes sense to me that what they've done here is to try and get us far enough that they can go put together the biennial budget proposal for us, which needs to come to us in the next few weeks.
Councilor Lissay and then Councilor Shepherd.
Thank you, Councilmember Mayhew. That helped. That reminded me that we are not dealing with a CIP right now. We are dealing with a biannual budget. Put that forward in my, push that forward. What I see then is we don't have $14.8 million worth of appropriations to deal with, or allocations to various projects to deal with at this time. We do have a 2021, a 2022 budget to deal with at this time. So thank you for that clarification. My apologies if I oversaw that, because I was looking at the total.
Councilor Shepherd.
Yeah, the one thing I'm still stuck with, this $14.8 million, is that we are going to also be looking at fundraising for that amount of money in order to have that money available for non-specified. And I'm not sure when we expect to try to raise that money in order to have that. So I think I have to have more delineation.
This is Robert. If I could try to answer Councilmember Shepherd's question. So again, this document's a blueprint. So what we're saying in 23 to 26, to Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew's point, is that there's other funds, other sources that could definitely be an option to fund these projects. We don't know what they are though. It could be fundraising for one project. It could be a combination of fundraising, state grants or federal grants. It could be a federal stimulus if there's a federal infrastructure stimulus down the line. We just don't know. So it's broad. We're not talking in specifics or specificities when we're talking about fundraising. We're just saying it's one of the many options available for outside sources of revenue into the CIP.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty quick answer on fundraising. I mean, fundraising isn't often excited, a lot of animation and excitement around it for a certain project that some people are excited about. The skate park was one, for example, that some said, hey, we're going to raise hundreds of thousands. It raised maybe 20. Same for the All Access Playground. I think it's raised something, or Drew, what was it, 20, somewhere between 24 and 20 and 30,000. They don't tend to raise a lot of money. The YMCA Community Center expansion was an exception, where the YMCA, with their fundraising branch, we were committing to a $1 million, or they did a feasibility study in the valley and determined they could raise at least $1 million. So on that project, at least when it was in the foreseeable future, even within the next 2 years, where biennial budget was conceived that a fundraiser of $1 million would be part of that. Beyond those, again, you could count them on 3 fingers. Well, actually, the skate parks in the past, so it's actually 2 fingers of anything that's in motion. We're really not talking about any mysteries there. The other mystery that's ongoing, of course, is grants. Not never knowing what sort of grants and to what amount we'll get for projects. So, I would very much welcome discussion focused again on the 5 items. This is the one variation again that we tried to respond to council comments and tweaks last time at Councilmember Holloway's question about going back and sharpening the pencil on the existing ones, such as the playgrounds, which we made some adjustments to. Love a response if the council doesn't think, if they're concerned that a 2-year cycle, playground every 2 years is too not assertive enough, or in the yellow list and on the orange list, if maybe they think some of those just need to be abandoned for now. But again, there's risks if there's grants that have already been awarded or that are in motion, if we walk away from some of those. And that's the only reason why we wanted to bring those back to your attention at this time. Councilmember Mayhew and then Councilmember Lassay. Oh, Councilmember,
sorry, I was just thinking about what you just said and it distracted me. Maybe let Councilmember Lassay go.
Councilmember Lassay.
No problem. Thanks, Robert. That I appreciate your explanation too. And Councilmember, I would let Councilmember Shepherd know that yes, I still have concerns over where the funding and where the fundraising or grants would come for the 14.8. But I think we can deal with that as we go forward. My question then, I've got 2, and I'll just go ahead and put them out there, and maybe it's easy to answer. We discussed at Parks and Public Works about the street resurfacing program, what the sequence of resurfacing would be, how we would go about it, where that funding was. There was a very well explained email that we received on the committee today from one of our fellow council members about how much money should we be spending towards that program based upon outside influences on the condition scores that we received. I know it's really new and it's probably coming up a little too quickly, and maybe there needs to be some explanation, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about, is this plan still as was presented last week, or has it been updated based upon comments from the committee?
So the amount that's been put into this table is based on the plan that was presented to the Parks and Public Works Committee last week. So nothing's been, I'm sure the Parks and Public Works Department is working to update that plan per the comments from the committee, but Finance hasn't received any of those numbers yet in order to inject into the table that you see here in front of you.
And that's fine. I assumed as much. I just wanted to confirm that.
And I know there's 3 councilors waiting patiently, but I guess this is maybe a good time to ask Drew, if you could quickly, looking at the list, or particularly the green list, question, comparing what they saw 2 weeks ago to this week, can you point out 2 or 3 areas where there were some tweaks, whether it's on playground replacement, what maybe some minor adjustments or tweaks in response to council concerns were there made, if any?
So I guess we talked a little bit about the street resurfacing and Snoqualmie Parkway Rehabilitation Program. The street resurfacing program, we had estimated about $4.5 million in the 2019 adopted non-utility CIP. As you can see here, it's about 2.3. So there's quite less budget that we would actually apply to that program. However, the Snoqualmie Parkway Rehabilitation Program, because that is a key goal of council, has actually probably increased since that time frame, or at least since what we introduced at the Parks and Public Works Committee in May, a little bit, probably about $300,000 to $400,000 or so. In terms of the sidewalk replacement program, I mentioned that we had trimmed basically to remove some, maybe the design work that we anticipated for that, or some of the construction management surfaces. Historically, what we learned last year is for like a sidewalk panel replacement project, that we didn't really need construction management services. So there was an opportunity there to kind of subtract from that in order to reduce the potential cost over the 6-year period. For something like the playgrounds replacement program, the mayor is absolutely correct. Instead of doing a playground every year, we would do one every other year. So for example, next year we would do one playground. And I think per the discussions that we had last September, there was an interest in completing the river View Park Playground project. And then in terms of the trails replacement program, similarly to the sidewalk replacement program, we took a look at how much we budgeted for construction management services and design services, and did we actually need to set aside that amount for that type of work for this, or is it even more simple than what we thought? And so we trimmed it back from there. In terms of the Parks Facilities Maintenance Program, this is a relatively new addition. Basically, we converted the Snoqualmie Point Park Shelter Project into the Parks Facilities Program. The intent of this program is to protect, maintain, preserve any sort of park asset over time, such as shelters or restrooms. I think the city last year, we experienced a fire at the Azalea Park restroom. And so having some sort of money set aside annually in order to support those incidents that may happen or other kind of needs to maintain our parks, that's something that we put into the picture here. And then as mentioned during the presentation, we also incorporated the facilities maintenance program into this. In the past, that has generally been handled through the operating funds, basically, and annually we might come back to say council, or biannually we would come back to council and maybe incorporate as a part of the enhancement list, a list of things that we wanted to do to keep or maintain our facilities. And basically this is just calling it out separately as a part of the CIP process. So we have some backlog maintenance currently. For example, the City Hall stairwell project is included as a part of this, the police station roof, the fire station boiler, and then we also incorporated into this program as well the replacement of the electric vehicle charging stations too. And so beyond this kind of 2-year cycle, we would then set aside money kind of annually in case anything arises in the next few years between 2023 and 2026 that we need to take care of. You'll have set aside basically a pot of money in order to use that towards preserving our facilities. So that's just kind of a rundown of our capital programs.
Thank you, Drew. Councilor Holloway, then Ross, then Mayhew.
So I'm hearing several things which went through what I'll call operations optimization. I heard 2 items which really went through that policy consideration of how often we
Councilor Holloway, you may need to turn off to improve your audio. Could you turn off your video to improve your audio?
And actually, there's one new item, the facilities maintenance, which is kind of a policy question. My face often distracts from what I say. Is that better?
Yeah, much better.
Is that better, Matt?
Yes, sir, much better.
I'm well, and we kind of focused in on the 23-26, which has a more specificity and authority than a horoscope, but not to a great extent. Okay, that's future biennials. That will change.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we should focus on the first 2 columns. I'm just not sure we've really, Matt, gone through those policy considerations to the extent we ought to, given the current financial environment we're in. I'll throw that comment to you and I'll shut up.
Okay, Councilor Ross and Councilor Mayhew.
You know, overall, I like how Drew, you've laid this out. The you know, you asked for all of us to prioritize what their projects that we wanted to see, and all of them are on there that I had suggested, as well as pushing some of them out. I noticed like tree replacement's gone. So does that mean that it's done in 2020?
Yeah, that is something that we would hope to complete this year. And so it's not budgeted, or we don't plan on budgeting for it in the 2021-2022 biennial budget.
Okay. I guess the other thing is we talked about this pavement plan. And last year when I was talking to residents, there were a couple of streets that are on that obviously are still gravel or partial gravel, partial cement. And they were Cedar and Spruce Street. And at that point, I told them a pavement plan was coming and they were going to prioritize the different streets. And so think when I saw the listing of, or the map of streets at the Parks and Public Works meeting last week, I don't know they included a lot of those specific downtown streets. And so would those be part of the utility CIP then, or are they going to be part of the non-utility CIP?
It really depends on what kind of work needs to be done. So for example, if those streets require any kind of utility work underneath, such as replacing a water or sewer main, then in essence, the utilities would pay for also the repavement of the street because you're tearing it up. And so there's an obligation within the utilities or enterprise basically in order to repave the entire road. So it depends on whether we're going to do work or not in terms of any utility work on that street, whether we would repave it through the utilities CIP or through the non-utility CIP.
Brian Coleman from Public Works is on. Brian, could you answer that question?
Yeah, specifically on the Cedar Street, that's going to be part of the utility infrastructure phase 2, or AKA Tree Streets, is going to be happening. We have found that there is a little issue with much of that Cedar Street is actually is King County. So we are attempting to work with them to, due to our budget, when we do work on King County roads, they require a full width grind and overlay, even if it's only for putting in a water main or a trenching utility work. And so we're trying to get in contact with King County so hopefully they can pay for their portion of the road, and we can just add it into our project. But that is scheduled to go out to add toward the end of the year.
Drew, I know, actually, I appreciate Councilman Ross raising the question of the tree replacement program, because I suspect that's one the council is going to get an earful of as each year goes by. I forwarded you a few emails already, and the sidewalks are busting up due to roots and so forth. You can anticipate us to be proposing probably an increase in stormwater utility fees in order to incorporate a street tree fee or street tree replacement cost or maintenance program into that stormwater utility, because street trees play a significant role in stormwater, or can mitigate the need for stormwater, reduce the amount of stormwater infrastructure needed by virtue of a robust urban forest program. So my question, I guess, Drew, is if that council was to approve that revenue source and monies to be able to execute and move more aggressively on street trees, how does that factor into this list? Or
so in essence, we would be shifting that work over to the utility CIP in essence. So then you would see something like a tree replacement program, street tree replacement program, come up as a part of the discussions for the utility CIP.
Great, okay. That's what I thought was important for Councilman Ross to understand. So it would shift from the non-utility to the utility by virtue that the street trees would be treated as part of the stormwater utility. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Mayhew and then Councilmember Shepherd.
Sorry, I just did that last comment. What, I don't see a street tree line on here. Where is that?
So there is no street tree line on here. What we would eventually maybe propose to council is to actually eventually form a street tree replacement program as a part of the utility CIP, not the non-utility CIP, but the utility CIP.
Oh, I thought the mayor was saying that something would come out of what we're looking at here on the screen, because it would go over there. Nothing would come out of here. It's just not in here in the first place, right?
Yeah, it's just not in here in the first place.
I think what we're suggesting, it's already been removed from here. Yeah.
I just want to be clear on that. Okay, that's what I thought, but I just got confused. Okay, so I remembered what I was going to say before. So I have 2 points I want to make. One is, we've got this red item, future capital projects, 14.8 million. That's a much lower number than we had for those projects last year in last year's CIP. So it's already going down a lot. We don't know which projects we're going to cut out of that, even to get to 14.8 million. Up above, when we were in the revenues, we said there was going to be about 7.5 or 8 million of revenues we hadn't identified, 7.5 million that we hadn't identified yet. Things like grants that we might seek. And I mean, just remember that any 6-year CIP always includes a whole bunch of grants that we're hoping to get, and then the projects that would happen if we get them. So that's always, you know, a list of, now, what's true is that on this list today, we don't have a list of those specific grants and which specific projects they match up with, because we all haven't had time to go through that process together. And we're going to need to do that. But what the administration is saying is, hey, they think 7.5 million or so is something that's achievable. And that's what they're going to come propose to us as our starting point when we get into that. And they think when they kind of match that up, that's how they kind of came up with their 14.8 million. So the only other choice we have is to take all that revenue out and then take all the spending out. And then, guys, we don't have a 6-year CIP at all. We got a 2-year budget. So let's at least keep trying to do a 6-year CIP. You know, let's at least keep trying to plan out more than 2 years, understanding that we got work to do, and let's plan to get to that work at our retreat, if not sooner. But let's not just zero that out. That just doesn't make any sense to me. That's just giving up. So that was one comment. And then the second comment I want to make is on these green programs. I want to point something out. Could you scroll up to the revenue section? So the total taxes number at the far right is 14.3 million. Hope everyone can see that. It's about the middle of the page right now. So what's really important to me, I know you all hear me talk a lot about sustainability. I think that's so important. So for sustainability, what we need to do is have our ongoing needs met by ongoing sources of funding. And they can't be equal, because otherwise we can never do any projects. So there has to be more funding than there is needs. And so one of the things I'm really encouraged by in this is if we look at that 14.3 million, now let's scroll down and look what the total of the greens are. It's 11.1 million. So that meets that basic criteria for me. We need to, in my opinion, we need to do work in the details, but as far as just at a big picture, this passes the sustainability test to me. So what it means is if we use up any cash balances, we're using those up for projects, for one-time projects where we're making the city better. We're using those one-time funds to make the city better, to add things. But we're meeting our obligation to take care of maintaining what we have, which is the green stuff, from our identified sources. So I just wanted to point that out. And then about those green things, that 11.1 million, this level of spending, and I'm really looking to Councilmembers Holloway and Councilmember Jeans to try and give, I'm hoping that you'll give us your thoughts and guidance on this, because you guys have been through this. That 11.1 million is about 1.85 million a year. City of Snoqualmie has never spent at that level on these items. It's been significantly less than that. Now, the question is, have we kind of been fooling ourselves? Because not to work with numbers too much, but look at 2021, it's 2.4 million on the greens. 2022 is 2 million. And then those other 4 years only average about 1.6 million. So what this tells me is that the city staff is telling us we've actually fallen a little behind and they need to catch up. So I get the message from staff, but I'm observing that this 1.9 million is substantially more than we've been spending on greens. And I'm just looking for, is that something that you kind of knew was coming, and have we been kind of, you know, playing it close to the line, and it's time to pay the piper? Or, but, you know, in other words, your perspective on, I know when people come with a budget, they'll reach, I don't want to say reach for the moon. I don't think they've done that here, but they'll reach for things. Are they asking for more than you think they need? There's certainly more than they've been spending historically, but maybe it's time to step up. So that 11.1 million, long story short, my question is that scrubbed enough? And I thought I heard Councilmember Holloway kind of asking the same question. Are we sure that those are the levels that we really need to commit at? Because then my view is if we do, then we do.
Yeah, I guess I recall you making that comment earlier or last week, Councilmember Mayhew, and one response is at least on that list, you can see the Snoqualmie Parkway, we're still hopeful we can get some substantial grants though. So although we haven't maybe spent 1.85 million in city money, when you add the grants to it that we usually get for some of these projects or some of these programs anyway, it helps get us to that point. I didn't respond to Councilmember Holloway earlier when he said, and to your point about scrubbing this list enough, I guess part of my question when I said, what is your reaction to it is, and again, I'm going to take the playground because that's the one we're also most familiar with. If we have 30 playgrounds with playground equipment, and if we're doing one per year for replacement, that's going to take us 30 years to get through the entire list of playgrounds. If we shift that out to every 2 years, that's going to take 60 years. So I'm somewhat nervous that maybe we're scrubbing this a little too tight, but that might not be a bad thing to do right now, given the crisis that we're facing, at least for the next year or two, and then come back and revisit those programs. But so that pendulum can swing both ways. Councilmember Holloway, I guess that my comments and Councilmember Mayhew's comments are probably a good segue back to you, and then Councilmember Shepherd. Councilmember Holloway, you have to unmute.
Dang mute button. In response to Jim or Councilmember Mayhew, well, keep in mind that we have grown into this situation. So no spending in the past was not at this level. Okay, we didn't have all these parks, we didn't have all these streets. These are growing pains.
And they were new, yeah.
They were new at that stage. Okay, so and without all the spending was somewhat packaged differently, so it's kind of difficult to do that comparison. But I will caution your other observation that this seems to has a wave coming here and then slopes down. This typically always has a bow wave shape, and new things will be brought on to move that bow wave forward. Okay, so don't interpret that shape as trying to catch up on work. That's just the shape of this kind of work. As we discover more things, as more roads are brought on, that will be added in, and that bow wave will move forward. Okay, Matt, I do want to reflect on the trees.
Yeah.
The plan is to move those to stormwater and then to adjust the rate to cover.
Correct.
Okay, so I'm not supportive. Let's keep in mind the current crisis we're in is because people are unemployed, some are losing their jobs, the economy is down. I'm not looking for opportunities to move things around and get money in other ways. We need to figure out how to do what we need to do with less. Okay, but that's just Holloway's opinion for what it's worth. I'm done again.
Well, that's good input, and we may need to go back then even on the green list, if not others, and say where can we trim further or sacrifice further in order to shift money to a tree replacement program in the general fund, or my thought was even a combination thereof. But until we get to the utility rates, you want to have an idea if we have some rates to remain fairly level or not. But I'm going to go to Councilmember Sumwall first for round robin. He hasn't spoken yet, and then back to Councilmember Shepherd. Oh, Councilmember Sumwall, your hand.
Let the record note that we are 48 minutes into a meeting and I have not said a word. So that's a record, and you're all welcome. So a thought and then a question.
Where were you?
I was here. I had to go grab dinner, but you didn't need to see me eat dinner. My thought is, I think it's sort of been said, but just a reminder. I know when we show these charts that go out 6, 8, 10 years, we always tend to gravitate toward the right. We're here for 2 years, right? And those are just to give context down the road. What's absolutely guaranteed in my mind is everything to the right of those first 2 years will absolutely be different in probably a year, and certainly 2. So spending time talking about those now, maybe not as fruitful. And then I have a question. that came up just based on the last comment. As we know, different areas are affected by different things in different ways. I know, for example, the school district is looking very tightly at whether our area needs to go to all online school, given our infection rates appear to be quite different than some of the other school districts out there that have chosen to make that decision. Where I'm going with that is I'm very curious if we have data on what our unemployment rate is in our community, because as sucky as it is that people in Puyallup or Bellingham are out of jobs, that's not my concern in this context. And I would want to make anytime we start talking about more money from people, I always want to have a very micro level understanding, if possible, of how our constituents, the people who live within the city limits of Snoqualmie, have or have not been affected economically by this effort. I just don't know if that data exists at that sort of level.
This is Robert. So, Councilmember Sunwall, we can, for the city level, it's usually an extrapolation. There's not specific data because the claims are handled at a county level. We could do some digging to anecdotally try to get some information on that. The one caution I have is because we're a bedroom community, we have a large daytime population that comes in the city. So if we're looking at just straight revenue and what is generated in the city, that bedroom community, those workers that come in during the day, whether they work at the business park, whether they're day laborers, they do contribute to our businesses here and the local economy. So say they're employed in a company in Kent and they get laid off, that's going to have just as much of an impact as somebody who lives in the city. So that's kind of.
You're right, but I'm talking specifically about utility tax, not paid by somebody who lives in Kent who comes and works here.
He's talking about the how many residents in tax-paying, utility-paying residents have lost their jobs. We're probably a lower proportion than most, given the more white-collar management type demographic of our community.
And all I mean by that is I want to avoid the big, broad paintbrushing that's been going on in society the last 6 months, in the world for that matter, and just make sure that we're right on that for our community. That's all. And I don't know if there's a way to extrapolate from unemployment claims, not counting people like all the teenagers who are making more money than I am right now because of the $600 perk. But, you know, do we have a way of extrapolating that data just to have some idea rather than, man, it seems like everybody's losing their job? That's not helpful data.
The one data we can pull that I could tell you immediately that has gone up, but I don't have the exact number right now, is the fact that we do have a lot more past due utility bills than we normally see. So what I can do is I can say, okay, in July of 19, we had X amount of late utility bills that were 45 days or plus past due. Now in July 2020, we have X amount, and I can send that to you tomorrow if that would be helpful. That's something that at least I have on deck.
Or Robert, what % increase in those applying for income qualified and reduced rates? There's been a few people we've shifted that direction as well.
We've had some. The problem with the income qualified, it actually goes back a year. So the way the regulations are right now, somebody that lost their job in 2020 wouldn't technically qualify for that. So that's part of the problem here.
So I think, Robert, I like that because, and again, I don't want to focus on the utility tax for trees necessarily. I'm just saying, I don't want to dismiss that simply because we think everybody's lost their job, right? And if you look at how people are paying their utilities now versus how they were a year ago or the year before that, that is a reasonable thing to look at to say, hey, what would a small utility tax increase do based on how our residents right now are paying their bills compared to normal? That's all.
Yeah.
Just to qualify, just a question for Councilmember Samuel. Are you asking about utility tax or the utility rates? So you're talking about the water sewer rates or the utility tax?
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
It's who's paying their bills in our city, because the last thing we were talking about is adding to a bill.
Yeah, it would be on the fee, not the tax. It would be a utility fee. Okay, Councilmember Shepherd, then Councilmember Mayhew, and then back to Holloway.
Okay, I have a couple of questions or comments. I don't see the enterprise system listed here. And it seems to me that if a significant enterprise system should qualify for a capital project, So,
Are you speaking about IT enterprise or what?
correct. And also, as far as who can afford to pay a utility bill right now or who's employed now, that picture could change radically. So I don't know that we can really anticipate what that'll look like even next month.
All right, Councilmember Mayhew.
Yeah, so one other thing I just wanted to bring up, Council, I think I've spent a bunch of time since our last meeting. I spent an hour each day last week out at different times of day. I know I live a boring life, just out on the parkway, looking at the vehicle traffic. If you guys haven't done that, you need to. I am now convinced that what was mentioned sort of in passing 2 weeks ago needs to happen. We need to understand a usage of our parkway because, folks, it is at 6 a.m., at least 9 out of 10 vehicles. Yeah, you think I'm going to say people going to work. Nope, it's big trucks going down the parkway or coming up the parkway. And those trucks, it's massively more. It's not, one truck is not worth like 2 or 3 cars. They're worth like thousands of cars each time they go by. So I think that the state has a responsibility. I think it is unfair for our residents to have to pay for what is clearly a truck route and the cost of repairing a truck route. I'm not saying our residents don't have some skin in the game. They all use that parkway. We all use that parkway. But I think we as a council need to take on the challenge of looking at that cost of the parkway, segregating out what is a reasonable amount, a fair amount to go to the state with, and we need to go to the state and we need to ask them to pay their fair share. So I just want to bring that up as something I believe in.
All right, Councilmember Holloway, we're gonna, well, your hand disappeared. Do you still have a question or? All right, Council, with that, let's wrap it up here at 6:56. I want to give us a few minutes to break before the regular council meeting. Don't anyone sign off, just leave this on right now. Our plan is we have a fairly light agenda tonight, so our hope is if the energy and time allows on our committee to hold, we'll pick up this conversation and maybe see if we can't come to some decision points, or maybe at least identify a few that the council wants us to explore further prior to bringing it back in a couple of weeks. So with that, I'll conclude the roundtable meeting, and we will take a break until well, let's do 7:03.
Okay. Hey Matt, I may need to reset my network. I'll be back.
All right. All right. See everybody back at 7:03.
Hey, Mayor. I'm going to be your timer tonight.
Okay, thanks, Rick.
So I'm going to go ahead and not mirror my image and take the virtual off so that they can see the camera straight up for what it is.
Yeah, it gets a little, sometimes it disappears when the virtual's on.
We get to see what the Rick Sanctum looks like.
Just a couch and a wall, council member.
Couch and a wall. Just a couch and a wall.
Just a couch and a wall.
Sometimes that's not a bad idea.
Well, it's 7:03, but I'm not exactly sure if I've got a quorum back here again. Yeah, if the council members could turn their videos on, that'd be great. Perfect, okay. All right, with that, I'll call the Snoqualmie City Council meeting to order and ask that Jody Warren please take the roll call.
Councilmember Jeans.
Here.
Councilmember Ross.
Here.
Councilmember Holloway.
Here with no food in my mouth.
Councilmember Mayhew.
Here with food in my mouth.
Okay, Councilmember Lassay.
Here with will be putting food in my mouth.
Okay, Councilmember Sundwall.
Here with food already down in my stomach.
Okay, Councilmember Shepherd
Here.
and Mayor Larson.
I am here, thank you, Jody. Council, can I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda for this evening?
So moved. Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve tonight's agenda. Are there any items for discussion? Any questions? Councilmember Shepherd?
Yes, I'd like to take the warrants off of the consent agenda.
Okay. Any other discussion, council? All right, hearing none, with that one request to take the warrants off, all those in favor of approving the agenda, say aye.
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 Those opposed?
Aye.
All right, motion carries. With that, we'll move on to proclamations, public hearings and presentations and appointments. With that, we have a nice presentation on the State Route 18 from the Issaquah Alps Trail Club. Nate Smith is in attendance, as is Dave Dunphy. I'm going to ask Jimmy or whoever's controlling the IT to go ahead and pull Nate Smith and Mr. Dunphy into the meeting so they can, David Dunphy and Nate Smith, if you could, as panelists, so they can at least, I believe they have a presentation that we've got ready to queue up and go to.
Can you guys hear us?
Yes.
Awesome. I'm not sure if David's here or not. My video is not working this evening, so you're going to just get my name.
All right. It looks like David was pulled over to the panelists. Yeah, David's been pulled over too. There he is.
Go.
Welcome, gentlemen. So whenever you're ready, go ahead. Oh, who's queuing up your presentation here? Do you guys have that, or I think the staff has provided it, right?
I can do either way. I can share it from my screen, or if the staff want to use it from their portal, whatever is more convenient.
Brendan, it looks like Brendan Ecker is the co-host, or whoever's got control. You want to, if someone could unmute and tell me which way you guys are going to do, either load their presentation up so we know that's happening, or let David grab the sharing.
Yeah, so I was given a presentation for the SR 18 I-90 interchange improvements. I thought that was from Mark Allison.
Yeah, if you click the agenda there's a link on the ours that will take you to a PDF.
Got it.
Our presentation there. And then if possible, Doug McClellan, who's the president of the Mountains of Sound Greenway, is also in the lobby. So if we could pull him in case there's questions that he can answer, he's willing to do that.
Yeah, it looks like he was either pulled over or yeah, he's a participant. So Doug's available too. Doug, welcome. Thanks for coming.
No problem. I'm here if needed. Phone a friend.
All right, well, I'll get started and then we can go from there. Thank you very much for having me, and Nate and Doug. We are members of the Issaquah Alps Trails Club. A little background on the Trails Club. They've been working on connecting and promoting and protecting the Issaquah Alps, tiger, squak, cougar, the raging river for the last 40 years. And we're really excited to talk to the council tonight about this unique opportunity to, as we invest money in the State Route 18 corridor, we have a unique opportunity to really connect wildlands and focus on recreation. So we're really excited about that. If there's anything that you kind of take away from what we talked tonight, the two big takeaways I want you to think about is that we have an opportunity to connect wildlife and really connect the Issaquah Alps to the Cascades. And we have an opportunity to build the infrastructure for our recreation economy really adjacent to Snoqualmie Ridge and beyond. And that we're at a unique place to act now to really build this infrastructure right. So if you move to the third slide here, I'm going to move kind of through a couple of these slides because I know that the council is very familiar with this project, and the next presentation is kind of about the 1890 interchange that you all have been taking a big leadership on. So we'll move through a couple slides. But if you actually go, sorry, to the fourth slide, one unique kind of piece that we don't often think about when thinking about this corridor is how unique the 18 area is just geographically and ecologically. So the area actually sits on 3 different watersheds and is really this connecting point from the Cedar River watershed that goes up to the Cascades to the 32,000 acres of protected public land that is in the Issaquah Alps. So it's a really unique opportunity to connect a lowland forest to the Cascades. So if you keep going to the next slide there, this is kind of just a picture looking from the Cedar watershed towards the Issaquah Alps. And you can see that the project is broken up into 2 phases. So that phase 1, which you're about to have a briefing on, is really the interchange up to the Raging River corridor. And the second phase is what the WashDOT is currently undergoing the feasibility studies for. So because of advocacy and work of our representatives, there's money to do the planning of that second phase. And that's really what I want to talk to you all about tonight, and what some opportunities that I hope the council continues to help push in that landscape. So moving on to, let's see, so that the next couple of slides are about that current project. So we can go to slide 9. Awesome, thank you. So this is the current kind of work time frame that the department or WashDOT's working on, that they have a consultant to kind of do some of this feasibility study. So they're in the collecting information phase, but by December of this year, they're going to transition to start actually doing some of the design work. So we're really at a pivotal point to make sure that in that design work, they really consider recreation and wildlife passage. So I want to just kind of talk a little bit more about those 4 points if we go to the next slide. So first, wildlife passage. We've identified 4 critical wildlife passage points. And if you think about the work that's been done on I-90, is that there's a unique opportunity when you're doing construction work. If you bring wildlife passage as a design criteria, it's not as expensive to integrate that wildlife passage into bridge work and other infrastructure improvements that you have to do. So there's kind of 4 critical areas. So there's the Raging River, Deep Creek, which is in this phase 1. And then there's Holden Creek and just kind of south of the Tiger Summit that are kind of identified as critical wildlife habitat. So if you go to the next slide, you can see kind of an example of if you really look at the design criteria, you can make bridge spans a little bit wider, or do kind of subtle improvements that can get you the value of that wildlife passage without having significant increased costs that would happen if you had to come back and do that. And we know that the state is required because of the Endangered Species Act and our commitment to salmon life habitat, that we're going to have to do some of this work anyways. So it's a great opportunity to think about other wildlife movement and how we can really connect the Cascades and the Cedar River watershed to the Issaquah Alps. Another big piece that we've learned from wildlife passage is that we have to think of these as a little bit separate than recreation. That when we put people in those wildlife passage areas, they don't really function as kind of that wildlife corridor. So we value that wildlife connection. We want to build kind of that infrastructure for it, and we want to think about recreation and safety. So that's kind of wildlife passage. Big takeaway, there's 4 critical areas, and that if we do it at the same time of the design work, we'll save money in the long run. The next slide I want to talk about is safety. So if anybody's ever tried to make that turn off of Tiger Summit on 18, you know what I'm talking about with that danger of moving across that landscape, or moving across that highway. The Trails Club really thinks that an interchange is the most appropriate kind of improvement in that area. So an interchange would allow traffic to move over SR 18 and travel in either directions. We know that cost is going to be a driving factor in the design work, and the cheapest alternative that we have heard talked about is just a Jersey barricade, so that you wouldn't be able to travel in both directions off of the Tiger Summit there. And a couple reasons that we think that that would not be the best solution is that we're losing the opportunity to make that kind of a unique trailhead to access both Taylor Mountain and Tiger Mountain. You're losing the opportunity, and if you go down one slide, to really support working forest in that zone. Currently, there's logging that happens on Tiger Mountain and logging that happens on Taylor Mountain because of land that's held in public trust. And we think that recreation and good forest practices aren't mutually exclusive. So an interchange would allow for that continuing working forest practice. And then finally is safety. So the ability to get emergency vehicles both to those trailheads for a search and rescue perspective, but then also to serve kind of the interstate. So that's why we really believe that the investment in an interchange will support kind of that safety at the summit. If you go to the next kind of slide here, kind of diving a little bit deeper into how this is really a recreation hub. This map shows an outline of the regional trail system. And there's a unique opportunity to look at the Highway 18 as that missing link between Maple Valley and Snoqualmie. And we're not saying that there necessarily will be enough money to build all of those pieces in this initial push of the project, but we want there to be the priority to put the design in there and create the space for that connection. Because we know that the Great American Trail is going to move across 90 and connecting North Bend to Snoqualmie and on through the Greenway, and that we also want to have that connection over 18. And that can be both for cyclists, but also the hiking community. One other kind of nuance of recreation is just understanding that there are multiple user groups and that there was kind of this intentionality to create space for all, from kind of designated hiking in the West Tiger area to the amazing mountain bike infrastructure in the Raging to equestrian use on Taylor Mountain. So just as that kind of recreation landscape develops, as this interstate develops, we want to remember that we want to serve all of those different user groups if we really want to create this as a recreation hub. And then the final piece kind of that recreation and some lessons learned from Tiger is that if we concentrate building really good infrastructure for smaller, like more succinct trailheads like they've done at Tiger Summit instead of, or not Tiger Summit, but at High Point, then you don't have to pay for a bunch of small different trailheads. You kind of create one and really put that the money and infrastructure into making that one work really well. And that's what Tiger Summit would be as kind of the key recreation access on the whole interstate section. So if you scroll down a little bit more, you can see these are a couple maps that you can look at your convenience, but they show the future planning of some of the trail systems. So looking at the trail system moving from North Bend onto the ridge, and then the next map down shows that potential corridor along 18 and showing how it can really serve to connect the extensive mountain biking and hiking network on Tiger to the developing network on the Raging, and how that can really live together with a connection piece there. If you scroll down a little bit more, the next kind of big piece here, so we talked about the interchange as kind of a safety piece, we talked about wildlife, we talked about recreation, and the final piece here is about land conservation. So as WashDOT expands the interstate, they'll have to replace the forests that they take during that process. And there's a unique opportunity to close a gap in public ownership of land to really help provide the foundation for long-term recreation in this area. And if you look at this map, you can see the striped area on Taylor Mountain, which is currently a private holding on that forest. And there's a couple other parcels at Echo Lake area that are on this map. So that's a unique opportunity that when WashDOT has to invest in mitigating their impact on the forest lands on the freeway, we can help advocate that they invest that money in acquiring these last kind of public places, which will allow for future recreation as they find the balance between a working forest and recreation on Taylor Mountain. So we've increased kind of the recreation access. So you can go to the next slide there. So currently, just to kind of recap, that there's a advisory board that the city of Snoqualmie is on that's advising WashDOT as they kind of continue this planning process. And at the end of August, they're hoping to have kind of the first mock-ups of kind of what they're thinking in the project from what they've heard so far. So we're really encouraging that the council kind of review this information and really speak during those advisory meetings, but also consider sending a letter to WashDOT currently to really prioritize the wildlife and this recreation infrastructure in this project moving forward, so that moving from August on to the end of this planning period in December, there's a clear vision to really create this infrastructure that will allow for recreation in this area and the enhancement of the public lands with the wildlife connection. So that's kind of the piece in a nutshell of like where we are in this project. We'd love to open the floor for questions about what we presented or any other information that we can give council to help them continue to advocate that we do this project right. And maybe throwing it to Doug or Nate if there's any pieces that I missed that you'd want to add before we move on here.
Yeah, this is Doug McClelland. My only comment is the city of Snoqualmie is poised at the end of Highway 18, and you can see the recreational opportunities for the residents of Snoqualmie, but you can also see the advantages of having a really safe highway that leads into your city for all the people that may either come to work there or leaving and recreating to the south. So there's some super benefits for Snoqualmie in particular for both recreation, wildlife, and safety along the highway, and then access. So, you know, we only get one chance to take this 2 to 3 lane highway and turn it into what will be a 4 to 5 lane highway and do it right. And the interchange, you guys were instrumental in getting the interchange moved forward. And now is our chance to collectively hold hands and work on the rest of it. So we know that we did the right thing. And granted, we're going to have to come up with the money to build it. There isn't the money to build this segment of it, but at least there's the 25 million to plan for it, and want to get it right. But thank you much. And any way that both your person on the committee, but also more collectively the council can just help spread that message, the better.
Awesome. Thanks, Doug. Yeah, and is there any other questions that council members have of the presentation or kind of the vision moving forward?
So who are the current landowners of those parcels you're talking about? And are they supportive of being at least considered to be offsetting for the forest land lost by the construction of 18?
Yeah, I'll probably answer. I can answer that because I used to work for Department of Natural Resources for 39 years. So it's owned by Sirius. It's an investment group out of Boston, Massachusetts, and the county actually owns the development rights underneath the property. And so there may be a need to try to find them an alternate property to invest in, and or at some point in time they may sell. We've certainly spoke to them about it, but it's not just the mitigation for the timber removal and the right-of-way widening, but also there'll be a lot of wetland impacts, and there'll be a lot of stream impacts with the bridges and everything that needs to come in. And so that just makes a lot of sense to look at mitigation that's nearby. So a willing person may need to find them an alternate property or something, but we've been in conversations with them before and they're interested.
Cool.
And I guess to echo kind of what you were saying, Doug, is like it's a common practice, if correct me if I'm wrong, of moving private land ownership around to kind of move away from a checkerboard kind of approach to really connected wildlife areas as our understanding of biology kind of evolves over time.
Well,
Yeah, always from willing sellers.
Yeah. So Snoqualmie, particularly in Matt's negotiation, has done that in the past to a larger extent than what we're talking here.
Councilor Ross and Councilor Shepherd.
Thank you so much for this presentation. It brings a different perspective to Highway 18 and some just the assets that are out there. And fortunately, the next presentation is actually WashDOT, so you have their ear tonight. So thank you.
Yeah. Councilor Shepherd.
Yes, I'm so curious if this is something that the Snoqualmie Watershed Forum has reviewed and the tribes have reviewed.
But by this, you mean their proposal or WashDOT's, the entire project? I'm not
The
sure.
entire project.
Well, they're absolutely stakeholders in the project. They're, in fact, they sit on the SAG, or the Snoqualmie Advisory Group. Or at least I know the tribe does. I'm not sure about the Watershed Forum, but yeah, I assume maybe a representative from them does as well. That's the Isco Alps Trails Club group is more of a special interest group, just expressing their desires and wants, so they don't really answer to those other groups. Councilor Lassay.
I too would like to thank David and Nate for the presentation, and Doug too. Sorry, Doug. I think we spent a lot of time talking about cars and trucks and infrastructure, and forget that we have some of the most beautiful land in the entire country. And I think doing more to make that land accessible and make that land enjoyable by folks is a big deal. How can we advocate easiest for this? Is there a way you could send us a link that we could share on Facebook? Is there or on other social media sites? I know we'll probably have something on our city website, but as council members, we have a bigger reach sometimes than just the city website. What is your recommendation?
Yeah, I can take that. We are happy to share kind of information that we've put up on our website around the project, where we've been putting updates. So it'd be great to have residents just understanding that. And kind of at this juncture, like Doug said, everybody's collaborating really well to kind of shape what this vision is. And I think the big ask to council is that they consider writing a letter to WashDOT echoing that we really want recreation and wildlife connectivity to be engineering criteria, just like safety is in their projects. And what we've learned as we've talked to the people that really worked on the I-90 project is that if you bring those two design criteria to the engineering, then we find win-win solutions, and we can really create the vision and create the framework to make it successful the first time through. But thank you for that. We'll definitely send along how more people can get involved in this project, because that's you're exactly right. Like we have an amazing landscape, and we want people to enjoy it, and that we invest in it.
David, Nate, and Doug, thank you all for coming in and again, expressing these great visions to us tonight. For the sake of time, we're gonna have to move on. I would just, last comment to the council, bring to their attention. I don't know if I briefed you on it, but there's an exciting nationwide project called the Guard to the Great American Rail Trail that starts in Washington, D.C. and they're looking for a terminus in Seattle. And one of the broken points where we're trying to find routes through is Snoqualmie. I mean, the valley here. Unfortunately, we're sort of a focal point of where that trail would come through here. You would, if you have this in your packet, but if you look at slide 16, you'll notice a part that shows a dashed trail going through that area up at the top of or near the interchange out to Preston. And so this again, I think one of the exciting options of some of the resources here is it could tie into what would be eventually a well-known national trail. So again, thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you for your time.
You're certainly welcome to stick around and now join us for the WashDOT presentation. And with that segue, I'm happy to introduce Mark Allison at this time to give us an update on the SR 18990 interchange. Again, IT staff, or Brendan, if you could make sure Mark, oh, there we go. You got him. Thank you. You're one step ahead of me. Mark, welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. Mark, I think you've been brought over. You don't appear to have video, but your audio is still muted. If you could unmute your audio.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I don't have any video, but hopefully you can hear me fine.
Yeah, we can hear you fine. Thank you. Very
good. Okay, well, thank you. Yes, my name is Mark Allison. I am the project engineer for the Department of Transportation for this I-90 SR-18 interchange to Deep Creek, the interchange improvements and SR-18 widening between the interchange down to Deep Creek. And yes, very good. Good evening, Mr. Larson, Mayor Larson, and members of the Snoqualmie City Council. Thank you for inviting us here this evening to update you on the progress of our interchange improvement project. It's been about a year since we selected the preferred concept. And since then, we have been hard at work refining the concept in preparation for release of requests for proposals from design build firms. This project will be a design build delivery methodology of delivery. The next slide shows the timeline that we have for this project, some basic timelines. We reached a significant milestone here just recently on June 30th when we published our request for qualifications, and we are on track to release the request for proposals at the end of October. And we expect to award the design build project contract in early 2021 with construction starting a few months later. And we think the construction, as you can see there on the far right of that graphic, will be ending up completing in 2024. While we are excited about the progress we have made, we do face some significant challenges. We're still waiting to learn if the revenue shortfall that has been caused by the recent COVID-19 pandemic will affect this project or not. WisDOT estimates a revenue loss of $1.3 billion over the next 3 years, which includes a $483 million deficit this biennium. This will affect projects across the agency, although we won't know which projects and to what extent for several months. Until we hear, though, our team, we're moving ahead with the interchange improvement plans. I know I work frequently on holidays and days off and everything else as project engineer to keep this thing moving forward. So I can assure you it definitely has my full attention. When we look at slide 3, that shows kind of a focus on the interchange itself, the vicinity, the interchange and the 104th there. At the interchange, we're still going with the diverging diamond interchange concept that was recommended by the city of Snoqualmie in a study a few years back. The design has not changed very much from what we presented to the community last year. The most significant change in this vicinity is that we have added a peak use shoulder lane for the westbound I-90 on-ramp. That's highlighted there in that red oval color there. We think that this will really be helpful to move traffic efficiently onto I-90 without creating backups on Snoqualmie Parkway.
Mark, I'm a little confused. When I read about that, I was kind of elated. I thought the red circle would be around the off-ramp, westbound I-90 off-ramp coming down to the Parkway or the SR18, where that traffic can back up on the I-90 for traffic going west on 18 or south. And people need to get in that shoulder in order to take a right to get on the Parkway to bypass that massive backup. And I thought you guys were maybe going to harden that shoulder. I don't understand why you'd need to have an additional shoulder where the red circle is here. We don't have an issue or problem with backups. I mean, that's where it's being metered right now, or going to be metered.
Yeah, with the interim ramp that opened up, well, I'm glad to hear that things have improved significantly for you.
The circle's in the wrong place because I don't understand what the issue or problem is.
Yeah, I think that the issue is when I talk with our traffic folks, the concern is if traffic is not modulated somehow at this location, that if it's just free flow without the
Mark, sorry to interrupt. I think you misunderstood the question. We know the battle about the meters. That's not the question. The question was that there was an added item, as you just said, which was to add a kind of a hardened shoulder to westbound I-90 ramp. And you're showing the circle on the on-ramp to I-90, not the off-ramp from I-90 westbound. I'm not aware of any problem that requires an additional shoulder going on an on-ramp onto I-90. There is a problem for the off-ramp from I-90 down to SR18 or the Parkway. So I'm asking, is that circle drawn in the wrong place?
Well, I believe it's drawn in the correct place. I can talk with our traffic people to get more information on why the focus on westbound than on the on-ramp as opposed to the off-ramp. But I know that location, the on-ramp, is a primary focus for our traffic.
Yeah.
For our traffic modeling.
The majority of traffic for coming off I-90 is doing a vast majority is doing a right-hand turn, or doing a left-hand turn, not a right-hand turn. So in terms of overall volume, hardening that right-hand turn may not have as big of an impact as you think. Agreed, it would help Snoqualmie citizens get in town a lot easier, but overall, again, the majority of that traffic is turning left coming off I-90.
I understand, Councilor Holloway, but what people do now is they go into the shoulder to bypass a long train of traffic trying to get left, and there's no backup, zero backup for people trying to go right up the Parkway into Snoqualmie. And I thought they responded to that concern by hardening the shoulder. I don't understand why the red circle is drawn on the metered on-ramps to suggest that a hardened shoulder has been added to that area. What does that accomplish in that area? There's no need for a hardened shoulder or an additional lane for congestion on that area. It's metered.
It's just additional volume. If you're going to have a meter, then having that additional volume, getting people out of the interchange footprint is very helpful.
Okay, so you're actually going to have two metered lanes potentially during congestion.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, I'm not. Maybe I'm slow catching on. Thank you.
Exactly. Yep. And so, yeah, this so the shortfall that's been caused by COVID-19 has been an issue to us, and
or Mark,
anyway.
Because I'm being mocked now. It's 3 lanes total, right? One for the traffic coming up from for 18 going westbound 90, and then it would be 2 lanes coming from Snoqualmie onto SR 90.
It would actually be 4 with the peak use. It would actually be 4 lanes there.
Oh, okay. So hardened shoulders for both traffic from south and from Snoqualmie.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And because we have the ramp meters there, we felt we needed to have the extra additional storage capacity.
It seems like you could accomplish the same by just increasing the frequency of the light, but hey, what am I? I'm not an idiot.
I think the point, as he said, Mayor, is to get them out of the intersection. Yeah,
I got you.
Right. People are stuck on the parkway.
Gotcha.
That's the idea. And so, yeah, that was probably the most significant change since we last communicated with you. We think that this will really be helpful to move traffic efficiently. The next slide, slide number 4, is a cross-section view of, well, let me see here now. Excuse me, maybe you can go back one slide. I think I got myself ahead of here. Nope, it is the next one. Sorry, slide 4 is the next one. Yeah, on SR 18, our preferred concept we shared with you last year, the roadway is widened all the way to Deep Creek. That was so we would have the DDI interchange improvements at the interchange of I-90 and SR 18 itself. And our preferred concept was 4-lane widening all the way between the DDI down to Deep Creek. Due to the funding, the funding that we currently have, we believe will not get us all the way to Deep Creek. So we have revised the scope of the project to include a base scope that widens SR 18 to 4 lanes. Just before Raging River. And so that's what is highlighted in the red oval. So that takes the SR 18 widening from the DDI interchange down to Raging River. It would not include a bridge over Raging River. And a second option calls for the base scope. So that's the base scope, is the DDI in that red oval. The second option would call for the base scope that I just described, plus work at Deep Creek. And that includes a new bridge at Deep Creek, which is located toward the left side of this graphic, and it's highlighted in a green circle. The third option encompasses the base scope that we talked about first off, and then widening all the way to Deep Creek, along with building the bridge. And so it would include areas highlighted by red, the green, and the yellow. All 3 of those combined would be the ultimate full meal deal, if you will, for the third option. We're hopeful that design builders will submit innovative and cost-efficient proposals that allows us to complete the entire project within the resources we have. Basically, bid day, we will know. On bid day, we will know what the different proposals are that we get, and we will know what we end up with scope. If it's just the base scope only, if it's the base scope plus the part that's circled in green, the Deep Creek, or if it's the entire amount. All three of those Olympic circles there. In addition, we have submitted an application for a federal grant that would provide funding for at least some of the widening to Deep Creek. And we will find out in September if we will receive that grant or not. The next slide shows.
Quick question, Mark.
Go ahead, Sean.
If that grant was given, would it have to be used for that stretch? Or obviously we want it to be used for that. Is that what the specific grant is for? Is one of those two bridges or the widening between the bridges?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm not a programming person, but I did prepare the grant application, so I can tell you how we packaged it, how we sold it. How we sold it was that the grant get us the money, and we can finish the widening all the way to Deep Creek. So how that ultimately is interpreted by the federal government, I don't know, but that's how we sold it. So it remains to be seen. On this graphic, we show the fish passage barriers. A very important part of this project is addressing 13 identified fish passage barriers in the project area. This is something that we are required to do to meet the state's obligation under the 2013 Ninth Circuit Court ruling. That was upheld by the Supreme Court in 2018. There are two places where we will remove fish passage barriers, and there is one on this project where we may remove a significant fish passage barrier. That gets back to the whole, what do we get on bid day? The two that we know we will get, that's part of the base scope, absolutely will be done. Part of the base scope is at the interchange. Towards the middle of your screen there, you'll see highlighted with the red circle. We will combine some stream flows. There's a bunch of stream flows in this area, basically a bunch of isolated drainage ditches, hydraulic ditches. We're going to be combining that, and we'll be directing it underneath. We'll be combining it into one stream and directing it underneath the existing I-90 bridges. There's two of them there. And also underneath the I-90 on-ramp and off-ramps there. There's the westbound off-ramp there, and then there's the eastbound on-ramp. So it'll be, this new stream will go underneath all of that. And so that's a big system there. It'll be an open channel underneath the bridges themselves, underneath the two I-90 bridges. So that's a key feature, open channel. The two that travel underneath the ramps, of course, will be closed box culverts. At Lake Creek, which is over to the far left there of your screen and highlighted by the green circle, we will remove the existing culvert that is there. Is actually two of them, and it blocks fish passage, and we'll replace it with a new bridge. There'll actually be a bridge there. And so then moving on to the next slide, more on the theme of fish passage barriers. At Deep Creek, this is that third location referred to earlier that we may end up removing. It depends on what we get from the design builders when they hand in their bids. This is that area that was circled in green, if you remember, on that plan sheet. It was the base bid plus Deep Creek. Well, this is the Deep Creek. So this graphic basically shows cars traveling in and out of the page, if you will. It's a cross section taken across the highway. And so where the cars are in that bridge structure, that's the new proposed bridge structure, 4-lane structure. That object is just to the right there, that big brown mass, that's the existing cross section of the existing embankment that we have out there now. It was built back way back in the day in the late 50s, early 60s, when Highway 18 was first constructed. And you can see down there at the bottom, there is a culvert that's there, and it is impassable, not passable for fish travel. And so at this location, if funding allows, we will remove the existing embankment and that existing culvert and replace it with this bridge. That's if that's all we get, if we don't get the full meal deal, then we'll only have 2 lanes, 1 lane each direction, actually in operation over this. But at least we could have a bridge under that base bid plus that option would make us future compatible at that location. And so then the next slide is a weigh station. So one part of this project that has changed a lot since last year, there was a lot of discussion that we had about weigh stations, as you probably are very well aware of, and inspection station element. Based on public feedback we had at that time and our own assessment, we decided to separate out the weigh and inspection station from this project. We took it out of this project. And that allowed us to prioritize the critical interchange and widening elements. Right now, the DOT is working on a design for the weigh and inspection station, but at a new location than what was considered the preferred, if you will, a year ago. This is the new location is about, I'd say about 5 miles further east. It's at milepost 42 at the Tinkham Road structure there. And so this gives you an idea as to what is being considered there at that location. And anyway, the main message there is we have taken this work out of this project. It will be its own separate project. And we expect that project to start in 2022 sometime. So then the next slide, that brings us to what's next. We did a lot of work with stakeholder groups and the community last year to identify traffic congestion and safety issues. And we are committed to prioritizing those issues as we move this project forward. And as we design this project, we are making sure that it is future compatible. One such evidence piece there was the Deep Creek. If we're lucky enough to get that bid on, we can have that piece future compatible, which would be great. And so even if we can't widen SR18 as far as we want to, we can successfully tie into any future widening projects that come through. And so we are going to continue reaching out to the community this summer and fall to let residents in Snoqualmie Valley know what to expect. And while we cannot meet in person because of the governor's restriction, COVID-19, we are preparing informational online open house, which should be ready by the end of August. And we hope to meet virtually with our advisory groups about that same time. As we are requested and are able, we will hold virtual briefings like this one for community groups. And so the last slide is questions. If I think that the presentation I wanted to give, I'm done with. So I think we have quite a few minutes here still to answer any questions you may have.
Councilor Sunwall.
So this is at least slightly related because, as I would term it, this other project stole money from ours. That may not be accurate, but I'm curious what is wound up with the weigh station in North Bend. You may not be the exact guy, but I'm just curious because I know that my understanding is there was actually some money siphoned off from this to go to that. So I'm just curious where that has wound up.
Well, I think what you're saying is originally we had funding in our project. We were funded for $150 million, and we a pretty good chunk of that was originally set aside for weigh station. What is the case now is we still have set aside some of that money for the design and right-of-way procurement. It's not a lot, but the vast majority of that money that was earmarked for the way station under this project has now been shifted over to use for the interchange and SR 18 widening. The funding for the way station element that we were talking about earlier, that will need to come from somewhere else. So those discussions, that decision is still forthcoming as to where that money will come from. But there is enough in there for the design to proceed forward with and for right-of-way acquisition. The actual construction money needs to be procured.
Thank you. So we sort of maybe got some of it back.
More than originally anticipated, yes.
Yeah, it was quite a bit. Well, I'll go ahead and give you a number. It was I want to say it was 19 million is what came back for construction to the interchange and SR 18 widening. So that certainly helped us, and that's was really, at least for us, was the tipping point that we knew we could get the at the very least the base bid. And it is interesting. I mean, this COVID-19, it's double-edged sword. We're beginning to notice a little bit of a break, if you will, in pricing on other projects that have been recently bid. And it's kind of very synonymous to what was happening 10 years ago when we had the real estate bubble. We were noticing the same thing. We were getting a break on some pricing. How much that will be the case on bid day, well, that remains to be seen, but it's possible that we could get one of those, or who knows, maybe both of those plus packages to the base bid.
Yeah, I think, Mark, it would probably be accurate to say that part of the reason why some of that money was brought back from the way station project is because you also did not anticipate the number of fish culverts and some significant costs to the tune of tens of millions of dollars that were associated with that, correct?
Yeah, yes, exactly. That was really, it was more than sticker shock for us, yes.
All right. If there's, Mark, thank you so much for your time. Again, we need to keep moving on. Appreciate your time coming to update us, and we look forward to, again, keeping fine-tuned to this project as moves forward. As you know, it's a very, very important project for Snoqualmie and our residents, and we're excited to see it still moving forward at this point, and cross our fingers and hopeful it isn't a victim of some of the challenges of the COVID budget years and so forth. So thank you.
Okay, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
All right. So with that, council, we're going to at this time move on to citizens' comments, but first a few ground rules. One, Snoqualmie citizens have a right to have their elected representatives perform their duties on behalf of the city in an efficient and orderly manner. Therefore, comments from those that have taken the time to attend the meeting will be limited to 3 minutes each. Please wait to be recognized and state your name and address for the record. Direct your comments to the council as a whole and not to individual members. And in order to protect the privacy rights of employees and protect members of the public from legal liability, please note that this is not the appropriate venue to make complaints or accusations about an implied or named city employee or agent. Such oral comments will not be allowed, but can be submitted in writing to the city clerk. Please note that this is not a time to ask questions of the council, mayor, or staff, or to engage in debate. The council will quietly and respectfully listen to your concerns. And then please respect the decorum of these procedures, as all due respect will be afforded to you. So I do see one, Leslie Shepard has her hand up. And for those of you that don't know, down below in the participants panel, if you hit the participants button at the bottom of the screen, you'll see at the bottom of that screen, it gives you a button that says raise hand. You can hit that to raise your hand. So we'll start with Leslie Shepard, then move to Chris Coffey. Just ask this, I don't know if they're unmuted. Leslie, can you hear me? Oh no, she's muted. If you could unmute her, someone could unmute her. Brendan?
I can hear.
There you go. All right, go ahead, Leslie. You have 3 minutes, and Rick Rudametkin will be doing the timer. Can you see Rick?
Nope.
Scroll through your videos. You can scroll the videos up and down, and then you'll see Rick hold a cell phone up to the screen. So go ahead. We'll start the timer.
All right, my name is Leslie Shepard. I live at 7516 Snowberry Avenue Southeast in Snoqualmie. I'm here today to talk about elected leaders, police, and our community. Full disclosure, I come from a law enforcement family, so I know full well the stress and the dangers of the job and the impacts it can have on both law enforcement officers and family members. I also would like to say I personally have had many positive encounters with the Snoqualmie police. That said, I firmly believe you can support law enforcement and still ask the question, how can we all do better? I've been following to the best of my ability a particular case in the Valley, our leaders' responses to recent events following the death of George Floyd, and how our police department handles or proposes to better handle its commitment to justice for all. And I have found in my research that the Snoqualmie Police Department does not have a separate internal affairs department to investigate and handle any cases of misconduct and abuse. While this is common to not have a separate internal affairs department in smaller cities, I am just wondering and hope that everyone is also questioning how are then problems handled in an objective way. And another question I had in researching is, does Snoqualmie Civil Service Commission, that is set up chiefly to vet first responder candidates and to promote them, have full access to candidate history and records? This seems like an obvious thing, but I have heard that in the past, and of course this is prior to Chief Phipps, that this was not the case. I would like to know, has this changed? And of course, the public during this time could certainly use assurances. Chief Phipps did make a public statement posted on Nextdoor on June 2nd, supporting the peaceful protest or the right to peaceful protest and affirming a commitment to justice for all. And I really do appreciate Chief Phipps for making that commitment. But what does that mean? And what steps is the department taking to ensure justice for all? I have not seen statements from our mayor or council regarding their commitments and just treatment for all in a time when these commitments and plans to do better are required for positive change. And I'm curious as to why the silence. And as a crucible or test case of how the city is handling its commitment to justice for all, I followed up with the Saldana family. I know every council member is aware of this case because the family has written each and every one of you. The Saldana family is well loved and extremely active in the youth ministries in the Valley. In 2019, 16-year-old Gracie Saldana was pulled out of her family's car by the Snoqualmie police and handcuffed in front of her family.
You have 4 more seconds.
Well, she was handcuffed on suspicion of shoplifting.
Time.
Great. Well, the family needs an apology.
Yeah, the chief met with her, but you can submit your additional comments. You didn't have time to in writing if you'd like.
Okay.
Coffee, and go ahead if you. Let's make sure you're unmuted. Chris, can you speak, or are you unmuted? There we go. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I am also commenting on Leslie Shepard's topic, and I reiterate everything that she said prior. And my main focus is our opportunity right now. And with the Black Lives Matters protests and all the awareness right now in the nation, I think we're at a really unique spot where we can really take this opportunity to reach out to the Saldana family as a council and administration and really just offer our support to them and let them know that we have awareness as to what happened and that we are going to strive for transparency moving forward and really take this opportunity to be a model city, to really model compassionate and caring responses to these sort of things. And that's really what I wanted to speak about. I just think the opportunity is amazing right now for us to step up and do the right thing and honor this family and let them know that they are heard, and to really push for police transparency and cooperation. So that's all I have to say. Thank you. And I'm Christy Coffin, and I live at 8054 Maple Avenue Southeast, downtown Snoqualmie. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Coffey. At this time, is there anyone else that would like to speak? I don't see any other hands up. Okay. With that, I'll close public comment. We do have concerns for the family. I think you folks would be happy to know that the police chief did reach out to the Saldana family, met with them and their pastor for, I think it was close to 2 hours. It was a very good meeting. So, but thank you for your comments and for your concerns for the community, for the conduct of our officers. All right, with that, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Of course, the warrants have been removed so this is basically an approval of the minutes for the July 13th, 2020 Roundtable and regular city council meeting. If I could have a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as stated, or the minutes. Any discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those are opposed? All right, motion is approved. Moving on to, okay, now, per council change of procedure, we will now immediately address the warrants or motion to approve warrants as presented in the agenda packet. Motion and second, please.
Motion to approve the warrants as presented.
Second.
Okay, a motion and a second to approve the warrants as stated by Councilmember Mayhew. Is there any discussion? Or Councilmember Mayhew is the chair of the auditing committee or finance administration committee. I'll kick it to you.
Just share with the council that the warrant report is not actually the same as what we approved in our meeting, but the amounts and the items that are contained therein are what was approved by the F&A committee. The F&A committee did the review of individual claims and warrants that are included here as called for in our council procedures during the COVID crisis, and recommended that the claims and warrants be approved as presented, all of them.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Shepherd.
So I have not been able to look at the warrants since the COVID emergency declaration. And the reason that I would like to be able to see them is, as far as I know, that I'm the only council member that actually is looking at the individual transactions and looking at the supporting.
Point of order, Mayor. I prefer not to disparage other council members for perceived lack of duty with no knowledge. So I prefer not to have that statement in the record.
Point of order, sustain. Ask all the members of the council to refrain from making the judgments on motivations or whatnot of fellow council members. So if you could just proceed without that. Councilmember Shepherd, continue in your comments.
So I do not approve the warrants.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Lassay and then Councilmember Mayhew.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to get maybe a clarification. There was a comment made at the introduction of the warrants that, and I believe what was said is the warrants as presented do not match what the committee reviewed. Could someone please clarify that statement?
That's a segue to Councilmember Mayhew, who's got his hand up, so maybe he could address that.
Yeah, sorry, I said that a little quickly. The form of the warrant report, there was a request that it be changed to make it a little more clear. That wasn't done, but nonetheless, the items, all of the claims and warrants included in the report were reviewed by the F&A committee members, and some of them were questioned. We received satisfactory answers, and the committee recommended approval of all of those listed claims and warrants. So that's the answer to that question. The reason I had my hand raised is, you know, week after meeting after meeting after meeting, we have this bizarre notion that we're not going to pay our staff. Of course, we're going to pay our staff. Of course, they did the work, for crying out loud. So this notion that we're not going to pay the city's bills, I just find stunning. I move to call the question.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to call the question. So with that, any further debate ceases until we vote. That needs a supermajority. All those in favor of calling the question, say aye.
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 No. No.
All those in favor of calling the question, say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay.
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 All right, the motion is approved by a supermajority. So no further discussion on the warrants. We're back now to the vote on the warrants. All those in favor of approving the warrants as presented, say aye.
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 All those opposed?
Nay.
All right, motion is approved. Moving on to ordinances, Agenda Bill 20075, ordinance relating to flood hazard regulations, adopting amendments in Chapter 15.12 and Sections 15.20.030 and 19.12.150 of the Snoqualmie Municipal Code. This is for introduction only tonight and will be possibly taking action on August 10th. So if Councilman Ross, if you could just read in the ordinance at this time.
FEMA designates portions of the city as being areas of special flood hazard. These areas are subject to the provisions of the National Flood Insurance Program. FEMA regularly updates both the mapping of areas of special flood hazard and the associated regulations. When this occurs, the city must update its flood hazard regulations and adopted maps to remain in conformance with federal law and rules. This is the first reading.
All right, thank you. Again, this is just for introduction tonight. However, at this time, is there any questions or comments about this ordinance tonight, Council? Councilor Ross, go ahead. Councilor Ross, you muted yourself.
Okay, sorry. Community Development Committee has reviewed the flood hazard regulations during the July 6th and July 20th meetings. The committee approved moving it forward to the council with corrections and are recommending council approval. There is a FEMA deadline of August 19th, 2020 that must be met in order to maintain our CRS rating and flood insurance through National Flood Insurance Program, and also impacts whether residents can apply for loans. And so Jason Rogers will provide an overview of the regulations and recommended changes. And this information was all sent to you July 17th to provide you time for your review.
All right, so Jason, you're going to do an update now?
Yes, I have a, excuse me, a short presentation.
All right, thank you.
Brendan, can I, or whoever's screen sharing, could I do that for a couple minutes? Please.
Which, is there a link he's supposed to click on there, which would just
No.
give him?
I can have him do it. It's in the agenda bill, it's flood regulations, city council, and then today's date. I mean, I'm ready to go with it if he wants to let me do it, but.
Okay, it's up to them. Does this work? Just tell me when. Okay.
Okay, go to the next slide. So you can see here on the slide, the National Flood Insurance Act was passed by Congress in 1968, and this act is what created the National Flood Insurance Program. And this act had two main objectives, which was to provide assistance to flood victims, first of all, but also to stimulate the sound floodplain management. And this was to both prevent damage to new construction, new houses, new businesses, things like that, but also not make anything worse for existing construction, homes and businesses that were already there. Next slide. So to give you a little bit of background, floodplain management here is the operation of a program with both corrective and preventive measures for reducing flood damage. So this is everything from we have a requirement that homes need to be elevated, for example. That's a preventative measure. We also have requirements to correct issues as time goes on. So flood improvement permits are required for any development within the special flood hazard area that was referenced. The special flood hazard area generally refers to the floodplain, and that's flat land next to the river. So in this case, it's the valley floor of the city. There's two concepts here that get combined a lot of the time. The first one is the so-called 100-year floodplain, and that's the area where there's a 1% chance in any given year that a flood will occur. Then there's also the so-called 100-year flood, and that's the flood that has a 1% chance of occurring in any given year. So they're related, but not quite the same thing. The 1990 flood, of course, was close to a 100-year event after a a lot of analysis after the fact. We think it was probably closer to a 70 or 80 year event, not quite the 100-year event. But that gives you kind of an idea of what a really bad flood around here would look like. But even with that, we have other floods that aren't, if you will, that bad, but are still certainly very impactful to the city and its residents and businesses. But what all this means is the city's floodplain ordinance has to meet minimum federal and state requirements. Most of the requirements are federal, coming from the National Flood Insurance Act and rules adopted by FEMA, but there are some laws and rules in state law and administrative code that we also need to comply with. Next slide, please. This is essentially the current map of the floodplain and the floodway in the city. I will note here that the map is not changing for the city. They have been updated quite extensively all throughout King County. We are fortunate that the lines aren't moving at this point. So all that light blue you see will remain in the floodplain, and all the dark blue you see will remain in the floodway, for better or worse. Next slide, please.
Hey, Jason.
Yes.
So that's odd because North Bend is changing.
Yes.
And we're not changing at all. I mean, this seems to be very different than what we were told maybe a year ago what to expect.
Yeah, can you go back up, Brendan, to the previous one? Part of the reason North Bend is changing is because FEMA has changed the way it evaluates levees. And so North Bend's levee protection has effectively been downgraded slightly compared to what it was previously, if you will, considered to be. Nothing has physically changed. It's really how FEMA evaluates the levee protection and how then water flows over the floodplain. Specific to Snoqualmie, because we don't have levee protection involved, the same volume of water is still considered to be coming down the river. We haven't had, there's no levees, there's no major, changes that have been made that would cause the water to go somewhere else at this point. So the map is like I said, fortunately, in general, staying the same. Obviously we would love it if the floodplain got smaller or the floodway got smaller, but that's not happening.
I guess I thought, okay. Also, all that work at the falls meant squat for this.
It did not mean nothing at all. It simply hasn't been necessarily pulled into all of FEMA's maps yet. That's why the CLOMAR process continues, and we'll see more on that in a couple of years. But for now, the very extensive flood insurance study that was completed just earlier this year doesn't show any mapping changes at this time.
Okay.
Right, but we have done mapping, the LOMAR changes in the past, in particular to the 205 project. We've been actively managing our floodway.
Yeah, we've have had adjustments.
No, I understand. I was just hoping for relief for the hundreds of citizens downtown that have to pay for flood insurance that they'll likely never ever need.
Yeah, and certainly that remains a long-term goal. And preview of coming attractions, I'll speak to that a little further into the presentation. Go ahead, Brendan, next slide. So I'll start with FEMA's requirements. These are the federal requirements. And so these are some of the things FEMA is either asking us or requiring us to do to our floodplain ordinance. So the first one, and perhaps the most significant one, are changes to a lot of the definitions. And if you look through the exhibit that has the red line, the underlined strike through, you'll see quite a bit of, in this case, I believe it's blue ink spilled all throughout the definition section. The second change is FEMA is really looking to designate a city official called the floodplain administrator as the person who oversees this. As the regulations have gotten quite a bit more complex and strict over the years, it's shifted. The purpose of their flood regulations has shifted a little bit from just a very technical review to encompassing a lot of policy aspects of floodplain management. And so what the city would do is shift that administering official from the building official, Sean Cooper, to the community development director, Mark Hoffman. That allows for the the community development director to better oversee the floodplain regulations and ensure that we're following the appropriate policies, citywide. Now, the day-to-day management of the flood improvement permits would stay with the building official because of that there's no reason to change that particular role. Another significant change that FEMA is asking for is some stronger language on interpreting the flood ordinance. Right now, it's the way it's written is a little, there's quite a bit more leeway in how we interpret, but FEMA is asking for a much stricter way of interpreting it now. Next, they're asking for some changes to the permit review requirements, which are not that substantive. And then finally, there's some changes to development standards. First of all, they're changing the way the residential structure standards are written. It's not really that much of a substantive change. For non-residential structures, it's a similar thing. And then they're also asking us to add some specific restrictions about, or not restrictions, but standards about accessory structures, or as FEMA calls them, you'll love the term, appurtenant structures, and also about storage areas. Next slide, please. As the council is aware, this city participates in the community rating system program. This helps us to get lower flood insurance premiums for our residents and businesses that are in the floodplain. Currently, the city has a Class 5 rating. One of the goals of the city is to move up to a Class 4 rating, which would add an additional 5% reduction in flood insurance premiums over what we currently have. So as part of these rule changes that FEMA is pushing to maintain our Class 5 rating, we need to add a requirement to elevate mechanical equipment for structures 1 foot above the base flood elevation. You'll recall that we inserted this provision in the code amendments a couple of months ago that the council approved. And at the time, it was, we inserted it in a way that wasn't necessarily well written grammatically, but now we've had a chance to really clean that up a bit. So that is in there. And then to achieve a Class 4 rating, there's several things we'll need to do. One of them is to strengthen the city's flood variance criteria. So these are not general variances. These are variances from the floodplain ordinance. So it will be harder to get a variance. We will need to continue requiring a minimum of 1 foot of freeboard or elevation over the base flood elevation for residential. The minimum federal requirement you can see in italics is identical here, so that's not really a change. We would need to require a minimum of 1 foot of freeboard or floodproofing to 1 foot above the base flood elevation for non-residential structures. This is a change from the current ordinance because the minimum federal requirement, which the city currently meets, is that non-residential structures need to be either elevated to the base flood elevation or flood-proofed up to the level of the base flood elevation. So this is going to add a little bit of freeboard to help us get to Class 4. And then the final requirement there is that we need to determine the base flood elevation before development can occur. Currently, there's a code section that allows interpretation of a long list of information to determine an approximate flood elevation. And you can see that laid out in the minimum federal requirement there. But to achieve a Class 4 rating, we would need to determine the base flood elevation prior to the development, as I mentioned. Fortunately, in Snoqualmie, all of our base flood elevations are determined through the FEMA mapping, so this won't actually be an issue for us. I believe Councilmember Jeans has a question.
So to get to level 4, you have to do these kinds of things. Is it really only for new construction, or does there have to be some sort of retrofitting for existing structures?
This would apply in FEMA's terminology to new construction, certainly, and also to substantial improvement of existing structures. Generally, that means if the value of the work is 50% or greater than the existing structure, then it is considered substantial improvement. So there's not really a retrofitting requirement as we might consider it, but if somebody wants to go in and make a major improvement to their house, they would certainly then fall under these rules.
Or if there was a fire a
Yes.
significant fire like we've had downtown.
Correct. Okay, next slide, please. Along with the other changes you saw, the city is also looking to make some other changes that we've identified in here. The first is to several of the definitions. These are definitions where we consulted with FEMA. One definition we have in our flood ordinance today is about fill. This is not required by FEMA, and because FEMA in general considers fill to be development, and so they consider to fall under that definition. However, we have a more specific definition of fill, which is helpful to us, to the city in administering the flood code. We use this definition quite a bit. So we would retain that definition. We'd insert a definition of market value instead, which conforms to our current practice. FEMA has okayed this. What we look at for market value is what the King County assessor has determined the value of the structure to be. FEMA's requirement is that the method must be consistent and explainable, and we have to apply it consistently. We also have the backup, which we placed in the definition of looking at FEMA's substantial improvement manual, and which the current code does not have in there. So that is an improvement in that regard. And then we also define mechanical equipment. This, the language is taken directly from FEMA rules. And so although FEMA doesn't technically have the definition, we're adding it for clarity as we administer the flood regulations. You heard earlier, we'll designate the community development director as the floodplain administrator. We would make an adjustment to how height for structures is measured in the floodplain. This is a significant one, and what it would do, and this was inserted after some additional discussion at Community Development Committee, is that with the increasing freeboard requirement, what you're doing is you're, if you will, squishing the envelope for a structure to exist in. So if you have the ground here, and normally you have a height limit, you can build with from the ground to that height limit. Well, if you add a freeboard requirement, an elevation requirement, you've just made that envelope a little bit smaller. And so adjusting how we measure height for buildings that either are required to elevate or are choosing to elevate makes it so they're not being, not punished, but they continue to be able to take advantage of that full envelope. We make some changes to the appeal section for clarity.
Hey, Drew, that last part, are you now measuring the height from base flood elevation, or are you measuring it from ground elevation?
Today, height is measured universally from the ground. And there's some specifics about how that is measured. It's called average finished grade. What the amendment would do is measure from the base flood elevation plus required freeboard. So in this case, it's base flood elevation plus 1 foot. It was written that way so that if we later change the freeboard requirement to, for example, plus 3 feet, then that method of measuring height would also move with it and not require an additional amendment.
And council discussed an option very similar to that years ago and resulted in the regulations you have today. So we kind of already at one time put an opinion on that, but okay. That new regulations will come before the council?
It's in front of you right now. This is a first reading of this ordinance. So certainly it would be appropriate for the council to discuss this at this, okay, and see what you think. The next change would be to appeals. We're going to clean up the appeals section of the flood ordinance to clarify that any decisions the floodplain administrator makes are appealable to the hearing examiner, and any variance decisions which are made by the hearing examiner are appealable to the city council. And then there's a couple minor updates that need to occur to the city's critical areas code and the clearing and grading code. Next slide, please. So here's my highlight about building height, so you can actually see it. You can see where it would be placed in the code and how it would be done. It is important to note that there would not be a change for non-elevated buildings. So anything that's built on the ground and is flood-proof, this provision does not apply to. It is intended only for those buildings that for non-residential structures that choose to elevate, or for resident is where this would really apply. see a hand up from Councilmember Mayhew.
So, yeah, I just want to clarify to the point that Councilmember Holloway was just making a moment ago. So if we were to adopt this as it is proposed tonight, if in the future the freeboard were to change, the example you gave was, say it changed from 1 feet to 3 feet, or the hypothetical rather that you gave, that change of 1 feet to 3 feet, that would have to come in front of the council or no?
Yes, it would need to come in front of the council.
Okay, so all you're doing here is streamlining that when a change is made, you're just making it easy, you're making it one place and that automatically gets picked up in the other, but you're not changing the fact that the council would have to approve any change in that freeboard, yeah?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, Mayor, there's two other hands up, so I'll let, I don't want to take over the meeting here.
It's fine if you want to recognize him, Jason. Councilmember Lassay and then Councilmember Jeans.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks, Jason. Just real quickly, I brought this up in committee, and I just want to make sure the entire council hears it. I had some concern over the building height measurement, as the provision for measuring height is done from the average grade plane on a piece of property, and there is a potential, although we could not identify any particular site specifically currently in the city of Snoqualmie, but there is the potential that a sloped site that may on the lower end have be prone to flooding, or be in a zone that could be either the floodway or the floodplain, that even though elevated, could actually result in a lower height allowance based upon 1 foot above the base flood elevation for the freeboard. Like I said, we couldn't find a condition that would apply to that, but I just wanted to mention that in the future we may, maybe there's expansion, maybe there's additional annexation in the future that could come forward. But I'm not opposed to this. I just want to mention that there is a possibility that you could have some conflicting elevation measurements.
Councilmember Jeans.
So if and when Sigillos comes to us again for approval of a building, are we more restrictive or less restrictive? I mean, could they get approved a height of a building that was consistent with the height of the building that they presented to us a year ago?
So any applicant would need to propose a building that is consistent with the code. So if that were to be today, they would need to propose a building that is 35 feet tall as measured from the ground. If this were to be approved, and that building is designed to be elevated, say it's elevated 3 feet above the ground, for argument's sake, then that height would then be measured from that 3 feet above the ground, assuming that 3 feet is base flood elevation plus 1 foot. And so you would see effectively from the ground a building that is 38 feet tall, but it would be compliant with the code, assuming the council passes this. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
All right, Councilmember Mayhew.
Yeah, just to that last point, my understanding of kind of the way to think about that point is, in the past, a height limit was measured from ground. What we're doing now is we are changing the requirements. So we're putting this, there's more of the total height that has to go to this flood mitigation. And therefore, we're still allowing them to have 35 feet of building. We're just saying, since we're moving the goalpost, since we're raising the bottom, they're still gonna have 35 feet of building. It's just that they get to measure it from where we're forcing them to elevate to. Is that a correct understanding?
Yes, correct.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Holloway.
but so keep in mind the prior discussion that happened years ago, and I think just before Sigello's, the height regulation was not necessarily put in there as a flood item originally. It was put in there as a view shed preservation item, so that one neighbor could not build and take away the view of Mount Sinai from another neighbor. Okay, so we limited the height downtown for view shed reasons, and that's what that discussion is. We've kind of made it a flood thing now, so let's think about it.
Well, I mean, it's always been a flood. Well, not always, but it's becoming more of a flood thing with the increased requirements. As you recall, Councilmember Holloway, this same issue came up in many residential neighborhoods.
Yep.
You know, there was an elevation program was virtually non-existent years ago, and you recall even Councilmember Dick Kirby that was pretty upset that he started losing views across the streets because even some new and existing homes that were being elevated to allow for the house to be picked up and as much of a full height garage to be put underneath. It changed the nature of some of those neighborhoods. But again, if we're going to really respond appropriately to flooding and create proper investment incentives, I think this is a way that we would recommend going. It could be remedied by a quick motion, one way or the other.
All right, Brandon, next slide. This is the longer description of the appeals amendment that I mentioned earlier, and so it's really, as I said, trying to bifurcate this into one subsection addressing appeals of actions of the floodplain administrators. So that's things like flood improvement permits, interpretations of the flood code, things like that, and then appeals of variances from the flood ordinance, and those are decided by the hearing examiner. So what we were looking to do here is align these appeals with the city's existing permit categories. So floodplain administrator actions are either category 1 or 2, which is to say those are they're administrative city staff, if you will, decisions. Those are have open record appeals to the hearing examiner, and then from there a further appeal to King County Superior Court. Variances are considered category 4. These appeals of this would be closed record appeals to the city council and then on to King County Superior Court after that. That would be similar to an appeal of, say, a conditional use permit, which the council heard a couple of years ago for Panorama Apartments. So just to give you a brief idea, there are restrictions on the number of administrative appeals in state law. And then the language used in the amended in the ordinance here talks about a person with standing may appeal, and standing, we did some further digging, is actually defined in the RCW, and you can see the citation there. There is one part of that RCW that of course would not apply. It refers to a person who has participated in administrative appeals at the local level. Obviously that wouldn't apply to such an action at the local level, but that can give you a pretty good idea of what standing means. Next slide, please. Oh, apparently I have a duplicate. There we go, I see why. This is just the table of permit categories that you'll recall from the plat procedures discussion that the council had last year, just to give you an idea of the 4 different categories and who makes the decision where the appeals can go. Next slide, and this is my last one. This is just showing you the schedule of the reviews. This has gone through. The Planning Commission reviewed this in May and June and had a public hearing. And then the Community Development Committee, as you heard, reviewed it starting on July 6th and then last week on July 20th. And now the City Council has it. As Councilmember Ross, the chair of the CDC, mentioned, we do have a FEMA deadline of August 19th, 2020. That is a hard deadline, unfortunately. So the council will need to act in some capacity at your next meeting on August 10th. And that concludes my presentation. Certainly I'm available to answer questions that you may have. Thank you.
All right, any further questions or comments at this time, council? All right, with that, I'll open it to any members of the public that would like to comment on this item prior to possible future action. And again, for those that are not familiar, just use the participants button, open that, and at the bottom of the participants window, you'll see a raise hand button. If you just push on that, we'll know you would like to speak. All right, seeing no one raising their hand, we will move on to reports. Parks and Public Works Committee report.
Nothing that hasn't already been discussed.
Community Development Committee report.
No report.
Finance Administration Committee.
No report.
Public Safety Committee.
No report.
All right, so moving on to the Committee of the Whole, we have 3 items that I have here. Update on council budget work plan. That might be a quick item that Councilor or Mayor Pro Tem, do you want to speak to that real quick? And
Yes, so everyone, you were, I emailed to you earlier tonight an update on our budget work plan. It kind of laid out, it's in the format of our, the work plan you saw last time we discussed work plan several months ago. And it shows in gray the items we've completed. There's a few items from earlier months that didn't happen. They'll just get folded into the biennial budget process. There was some hope to maybe if we had time to get a jump on some of the pieces that went in there. It's not I don't believe it's a problem that we just fold those into the biennial budget process. But so tonight we've been working on the non-utilities. We had a roundtable on the non-utilities CIP as we did 2 weeks ago. So that was originally planned to happen, believe it or not, by the end of April. So to give you a sense of where we're at on our time frame, here we are, end of July. The big changes really are that we had hoped in May, June to be digging into the utilities, the operating budget, the capital budget, and updating the utility CIP. That was probably overly optimistic in any event. What the current plan is to spend October on that. So the summary, kind of the high level summary of this change is that in August, we're going to move into the biennial budget for the governmental funds. So we'll hopefully get through that in August and September, hopefully have our budget by the end of September, and then in October, we'll move into utilities. So that's the kind of the high level plan. You can see from what I emailed to you that we're several months behind, but that will still get us done before the end of the year in time to get our biennial budget passed. If we're able to keep to this timeline from here on. So this is discussed with our little high-level group that we established at the retreat, which is the mayor, the city administrator, and me, and then there's a couple key staff members that are involved in that as well. So they've kind of mapped out what's going to happen, what they're going to present to our different committees to facilitate this. But there's going to be more action, especially obviously with the budget at our committees and then at our council meetings with roundtables. And then hopefully we get through this on that revised timeline. So any questions about the revised timeline?
Councilor,
yeah.
Councilor Sunwell.
Yeah, is Mark on the call?
Mark Carrera, Hoffman, which one?
Sure. So, Mark, do you see us having anything coming from your direction that is going to make us wish we had done anything quicker?
I'm always going to answer that yes, but if you're referring to mill site, no.
Okay, that's a good answer.
And to also to that point, Councilmember Sunwell, I would just point out the plan is right now that we're going to continue to try and do most of the information processing around these remaining topics with the budget in roundtables.
Okay, fair.
and then we can spill over into council meetings as necessary, especially as we get towards our deadlines here and we just have to get our decisions made. But that also does leave the council meetings available for normal other business.
All right. So if there's nothing else on that, Mayor Pro Tem or Councilmember Mayhew, I'll defer to you. We have about 18 minutes left. Well, not 18. You can go as long as you want. We can go to midnight if you'd like. We have two issues on the council endorsement of the non-utility CIP, which I suspect we're not going to accomplish that in 20 minutes. Council communications, I'll defer to you as to which one you want to take.
So I think I'd like to take up council communications. If there's no objection from other council members, I think we had a pretty good discussion on non-utility CIP. Please, I would say, if there's any additional information we need, any additional thoughts that we need to share with each other, let's be prepared to do that. I think at our next meeting, we really need to give direction. I think, frankly, that administration is going to move forward putting together the biennial budget proposal based on the various feedback they've heard from us. But let's try to be in a position to give them a green light on the general approach and the green items if we're willing to give that. So maybe try and put ourselves in a position to endorse that at our next meeting, early in our next meeting, so we can move on to biennial budget topic. So if there's no objections, if that's acceptable, I'd propose we move on to council communications.
Okay, I'd say that's a yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, sorry, I was flipping it. Couldn't see if there's any hands raised. Okay, council communications. The topic is that there have been complaints received against a council member. We would usually hear complaints against a council member in executive session. The complaints are regarding Councilmember Shepherd. She does have the option, Councilmember Shepherd, you do have the option to hear these complaints made in open session. You have that right under RCW. So would you just confirm to us, would you prefer to go into executive session, which is what we would normally do, or do you prefer to hear these in open session?
Open session.
All right, then to just summarize, and I think you all were copied on an email that I sent to Councilmember Shepherd early in the weekend, so that she would have a chance to be aware of the complaints that have been brought and be able to comment on them tonight. The concern is that that if city officials make false statements when they're made at things like city events or things like this council meeting or any other council meeting, there's other elected officers and employees who can typically correct the record at that time publicly. When false statements, if false statements are made in other venues where there aren't any other representatives, then we have the risk that a city official has made a false statement and it goes uncorrected. So there were many of you that have complained about, in particular, 5 particular statements that were made by Councilmember Shepherd in an official email that was sent out to a member of the public. And the concern is that these 5 statements were false. So the request I sent out on your behalf to Councilmember Shepherd was a request that she provide evidence regarding those statements if she indeed believes she has any supporting those, so that we could understand that. And so, Councilmember Shepherd, I'm hoping you might be willing to comment on those 5 items and let us know what evidence you have supporting those.
Okay.
Well, Councilmember Mayhew, could you go one by one through those and state those for the record, please, or what they are? Yeah, so Councilmember Shepherd, would it be all right with you? I'll read one and then maybe you respond to that and then I can go to the next one. Is that acceptable?
Actually, I'd rather do it. I've got a prepared statement that addresses all of them.
All right, then I'll just read the 5 concerns. The first is a concern in regard to an alleged complaint made against, I'm sorry, let me put the wrong note in front of me, just a moment. The concerns are that first that you wrote that in regard to an investigation by the Snoqualmie Police Department into a 2019 sexual assault report that, quote, the Snoqualmie PD has a conflict of interest, and that, quote, the Snoqualmie PD should not be doing the investigation because of the conflict of interest. So the request is, would you provide evidence supporting the claim that this investigation involved a conflict of interest, and that such evidence has ever been presented to the Snoqualmie Police Department or any other law enforcement agency? The second is that in regard to that same matter, you further wrote that, quote, a rape kit has been mishandled by the Snoqualmie Police Department. So there's a request, would you please provide evidence supporting this statement? Thirdly, you wrote, in regard to a brief police stop of a suspected shoplifter who was in fact innocent, that, quote, unfortunately, your case is not an isolated case. There's a request if you would provide evidence of other such instances. The fourth item is that you wrote in regard to an alleged complaint made against a police officer in 2019 that, quote, I doubt that complaint went anywhere. The request is, could you provide evidence for that statement, keeping in mind that prior to you writing that, the council had been briefed by the police chief regarding what in fact was done with that complaint. And then fifth, you wrote that the Snoqualmie Civil Service Commission, quote, has not been following state law. And further that, quote, most cities in Washington do not follow state code for civil service commissions. The request is, would you specify which state laws or code Snoqualmie and most cities in Washington do not follow, and give evidence for that? So those are the 5 requests and concern statements of concern.
Okay. So before I answer the questions, I'd like to say that rather than focusing on a member of city council, the council should be focusing on the family who was victimized by the Snoqualmie police. And why are they being ignored?
Councilmember Shepherd, I'm going to ask that you keep your comments focused on answering the questions from the Mayor Pro Tem. This is not a time for you to meander and just add additional items, or, I mean, even the comment you just made is you're making a judgment on motivations or character without providing substance to that. So if you could keep those comments, your comments, again, dispassionate, focused on just answering the question of the Mayor Pro Tem. Mayor Pro Tem, go ahead.
And if I could just add, I think the hope I have is that if you have evidence that these are not false statements, that we hear that, because I believe that the council is concerned about what action it should take if in fact it concludes these are false statements.
Yeah. Example, Councilmember Shepherd, you just made the statement that we should focus on the family that was victimized. You're making conclusions of fact without presenting facts. Again, if you could focus on facts and respond to the questions.
Okay, I'm trying to respond, and I'm being edited as I speak. And I either can respond or I am be allowed to speak without interruption, or I can't. It's up to you.
What I'm saying is your response, you're certainly, everybody wants to hear your response, but it shouldn't be filled with further slanderous comments and statements and judgments that without basis in fact.
Mayor, point of order.
You're
making a judgment about what she may say before she's even said it. I would like to allow the council member to have a chance to speak. If her statement has further issues to be dealt with, or other questions that may be raised, we can raise those in the future. But as a point of order, I would like to hear the council member speak.
Okay, I'll sustain those comments. We'll continue. Go ahead, Councilmember Shepherd.
Okay. So rather than focusing on a member of the city council, the city should be focusing on the family who was victimized by the Snoqualmie police. Why are they being ignored? It is not adequate to have the Snoqualmie police investigate themselves. They are a very small department with no opportunity to be objective. It would be more thorough and objective if an investigation was done by an outside agency that can be remain detached. It is no secret that the city administration and most members of city council disagree with me on many policy matters. When I ran for this office, it was on a platform of challenging the administration and council on those policies. And 54% of the voters of this city elected me based on that platform. It is also no secret that the administration and many council members would prefer that I not speak up when I see problems in the city government. It is important for healthy democracy to include all voices, whether you agree or not with those voices. I have always been very careful to be clear in my communications that I do not speak on behalf of the council or the city as a whole unless authorized to do so. For anyone who is not familiar with the matter before the council, in 2019, the Snoqualmie police detained a teen in the North Bend Outlet Mall, falsely accused them of shoplifting. When the PD gathered more information, the accusation was determined to be false and the teen was released. A parent of the teen followed up on this matter. The city's response was, in my opinion, and in the opinion of the parents, completely inadequate. The parents sent an email about this to Snoqualmie City Council members in June of this year. On June 16, I sent an email to the parent. In that letter, I expressed sympathy for the family. I also talked about many issues that I have seen with our police department. This weekend, council member and Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew sent me an email stating, many of our fellow council members have complained about statements you made in an email from your city email account addressed to a community member. The concern is that these statements are false and were made without evidence and therefore in disregard of their truth or after evidence of their falsehood was provided. Council member Mayhew's email to me is carefully worded to indicate that the council is concerned that my statements are false, rather than directly saying that statements are false. However, I consider this a direct accusation that I am lying. His email asks me to prove that my statements in the letter to the parent were truthful. Instead, the burden should be on the accuser to show that my statements are false. Nothing in my statements is false. However, I wish the public to have full visibility into how council is handling this matter. I choose to respond to these accusations, although the response to some will be limited to avoid compromising an ongoing investigation by appropriate authorities into Snoqualmie Police Department. In the council members Mayhew's email, you state, many of our fellow council members have complained about statements you made in an email from city email account addressed to a community member. The concern is that these statements are false and were made without evidence and therefore in disregard of their truth or after evidence of their falsehood was provided. These complaints were directed to me as the Mayor Pro Tem and Chairperson of the Committee of the Whole and of the Finance and Administration Committee, and with a request that discussion of these complaints be placed on City Council agenda on May 27, 2020. At that meeting, they are requesting you provide evidence supporting these statements. The specific concerns are as follows. You wrote that in regard to an investigation by the Snoqualmie Police Department into a 2019 sexual assault report, the Snoqualmie Police Department has a conflict of interest, and the Snoqualmie Police Department should not be doing the investigation because of the conflict of interest. At our meeting, would you provide evidence supporting your claim that this investigation involved conflict of interest and evidence that such information has ever been provided to the Snoqualmie Police Department or any other law enforcement body. My response: I definitely reported the conflict of interest to the Snoqualmie Police Department. I quote from my letter to the parent, which is the topic of Council Member Mayhew's letter. Quote, after the resident's sexual assault, I was interviewed by a detective from the Snoqualmie Police Department where I told him numerous times that the Snoqualmie Police Department should not be doing this investigation because of the conflict of interest. There is also, end quote, there is also active investigation into the Snoqualmie Police Department by appropriate authorities. The information about conflict of interest has also been provided to that investigation. I do not wish to interfere with an active investigation by discussing this information further. In regard to the same matter, you further wrote, this is Mayhew speaking again. In regard to the same matter, you further wrote that the rape kit has been mishandled by the Snoqualmie Police Department. At our meeting, would you provide evidence supporting this claim?
A point of order, Mayor. I never said that any rape kit had been mishandled. I never said that. I said that Council Member Shepherd had said that.
Yeah, point sustained. Continue, Councilman Shepherd.
All right. So there's, this is something that needs to be handled by the investigative agencies, but there is evidence that there's some problem with how that has been handled. And I think that out of respect for the person who filed that report and the potential litigation that will follow, that this is something that needs to be dealt with at that point. But you can go to KSARC, KCSARC, the advocate that's handling this case, and she would be able to give you more details. And you should talk to Detective Bruton.
So you're willing to defame the police department and just throw this out there, but not provide the evidence that's defaming them? I just want to make clear that's what you're.
So what I would like to state is that when it gets into
You said, Councilmember Shepherd, they mishandled the rape kit.
Councilmember Summer, let's hold off on, I know Councilmember Ross has her hand up too. I'm going to let her, she's doing what I asked, which is going through the questions and answering them. Let's let her complete that, and then I'll open it up for further discussion. Go ahead, Councilmember Shepherd.
So you wrote in regard to a brief police stop of a suspected shoplifter who was in fact innocent, that unfortunately your case is, this is me, that Councilmember Mayhew is quoting. Unfortunately, your case is not an isolated case, end quote. And then this is back to Mayhew again. At our meeting, would you provide evidence of other such instances? So this is coming out of a sentence that has to do with other related cases, but not specifically to someone who has been falsely arrested for shoplifting, but just other cases in general. So then I would refer back to like Nick Hogan and that case. So again, going back to Councilmember Mayhew's letter, you wrote that in regard to an alleged complaint made against a police officer in 2019, and this is me speaking, I doubt that a complaint went anywhere, end quote. At our meeting, would you provide evidence for this statement, keeping in mind that prior to your writing, the council was briefed by the police chief regarding what was done with this complaint? So this is my response. It is incorrect that the police chief briefed the council prior to my writing the quoted statement. The chief's briefing came after my letter to the father of the victim. And then the next, and then as far as the next question, you wrote that the Snoqualmie Civil Service Commission has not been following state law, and that most cities in Washington, this is my quote that he's quoting, most cities in Washington do not follow state code for civil service commissions, end of my quote. And now back to Councilmember Mayhew's quote. At our meeting, would you specify which state laws or code Snoqualmie and most cities in Washington do not follow and provide evidence. So here we have RCW 41.08 or RCW 41.12 and RCW 4114 describe how civil service commissions are to operate in an email thread between myself and members of Snoqualmie Civil Service Commission beginning January 9, 2020 and copied to the City Council. I identified a number of areas where the commission was not following these state laws. As the thread continued through April 3rd, 2020, the City Council, Mayor Larson, other city officials were included. Among the deficiency I identified, not always meeting monthly, not always posting agendas in advance, not certifying payrolls for the police and fire departments, not appointing a secretary and chief examiner. So basically that's the end of my response to your questions.
Thank you, Councilmember Shepherd. So I don't know if any other council members have questions or comments.
Councilmember Ross and then Councilmember Sunwell.
You responded to each one, but you really didn't tell us where you came up with your what you call facts, and such as you say conflict of interest. But what was the conflict of interest? And then you're privy to evidence. Why are you privy to any evidence where you've located this evidence? I mean, you're just kind of regurgitating what you wrote.
You want a response or?
Go ahead, Councilmember Shepherd.
Okay, so I happen to know about some details to the investigation because I am a friend of the person who made the report. And the information that's more detailed is you would have to talk to the Snoqualmie Police Department, and I don't know how much is reasonable to disseminate in a public meeting.
Councilmember Shepherd, if you're not willing to say it in a public meeting, then why are you saying it publicly to a resident or on an email or social media? And so I think this council's struggling to understand your logic. If you were making these allegations and statements out publicly, but now you won't provide the facts or the evidence for that statement. And I assume it's because you're cautious as to whether it's in fact found to be factual or not. Is it speculative? Is it suspicion or is it fact?
Part of my comments were speculative, but based on what I have seen in other situations that's been handled by the police department. And some of them where I say that it's fact, and it's something that's not appropriate for us to discuss with the city council is probably really should be left with the police department investigation. My commenting about it.
Is the conflict of interest that you're speaking of
Point of order.
Or a fact or speculation?
Order.
Go ahead.
Okay, so to finish my comment is that.
No, what is your point of order?
My point of order is I wasn't finished speaking and you interrupted me.
Continue. Point sustained.
Okay, so when I speak in my email to the residents of Issaquah that came to visit the outlet mall, I wanted them to know that there are other concerns, but I did not detail any specifics. But I wanted to let them know that their incident is not in a vacuum, that there are other things that are being looked at and there are concerns. And I wanted to let them know that basically I wanted to let the family know that I'm one council member that is willing to communicate with the family and tell them that I was just really shocked at this happening to this family, and I really would like to see the city apologize to the family.
Councilmember Sunwell, and then Councilmember Jeans and Councilmember Holloway.
Yeah, Councilmember Shepherd, a couple things here. I have no idea why you would, in an effort to grieve with this young woman and her family, why a rape kit being mishandled by the Snoqualmie Police Department has anything to do. It sounded more like a letter, more about you grieving Aaron's and completely invalidating to the family. But I guess ultimately that's up to them whether it was or not. You said the rape kit has been mishandled by the Snoqualmie Police Department. You seem very, very concerned about not revealing facts and contaminating, the process. Yet you're going out on the record to say the rape kit, not maybe, but the rape kit has been mishandled by the Snoqualmie Police Department. You have now made that public. What evidence do you have to suggest that the rape kit has been mishandled by Snoqualmie Police Department?
Is something that I can't share with you.
But you can share it with the family that it has, but you can hide behind the so-called facts.
I believe so.
You should try running for city council in Seattle. I have one more question, and that is, you said that the Snoqualmie Police Department is under investigation. I'm unaware of the Snoqualmie Police Department being under investigation. Can you point to what investigation they're under?
That's for the investigative agency to let the city know.
Really?
Well, then why are you letting people know if it's for them to let them know? Let justice run its due process without you interfering. But you're publicly stating something that you're saying should be left to due process.
You represent, Ms. Shepherd, 14,000 people, a slim majority of which voted you into office. Okay? And I would suggest to you that these two comments I've talked about, the rape kit and suggesting that Snoqualmie Police Department is under investigation without providing an ounce of proof that any of those is happening, is not representing all of the citizens, not even some of those you voted for. I'm done.
Councilmember Jeans and Councilmember Holloway.
I'd like to make a comment about First Amendment rights. Peggy, you certainly have First Amendment rights to express your views pretty much about anything. But it is a unique position that you are in and that we are in as council members when you have said at the beginning of this presentation that you just read to us, you said that you make it clear on every occasion, I think stating what you said, you make it clear that you speak just for yourself. You don't speak for the council. But and that is important. That is very important that you point out that you only speak for yourself. I don't recall in the email that you sent to the family where there was anything in that email that you said that you were speaking as one council member or you were speaking as an individual rather than as a representative of the city of Snoqualmie with unique facts that council members have about matters. So it's something to me that I don't see or I don't recall the occasions where you said you expressed that you are speaking for yourself and it is your opinion. I'd like to comment.
Councilmember Holloway.
So I'm sorry, there was opportunity to if there are things you cannot disclose publicly, there was opportunity at the beginning of this to go to executive session and you refused. That is absurd on its face. Okay, to hide behind, I can't publicly disclose and ask for public discussion. It's beyond me. Councilmember Mayhew, are you going to be making motion at the end of this discussion?
Councilmember Mayhew, go ahead and answer, but you have to unmute.
Yeah. I was going to point out a path that council could take. I wasn't going to necessarily make a motion. I was going to point out a path and see if council members would make that motion.
All right. Can I continue, Matt?
Councilmember Holloway, continue. I thought you were done.
As you've seen, recent communications by Councilman Shepherd has demonstrated a high level of distrust concerning and animosity toward and disrespect for this.
Point of order.
Hang on. Well, go ahead, Councilmember Shepherd. Point of order.
Council members have been attacking what my intent was consistently.
That should sound very familiar to you.
Yeah, not sustained. Councilmember Shepherd, I found it a little baffling that you constantly turned around. You made the comment earlier that the burden is on the accusers, as if everybody's accusing you or something. You've been the accuser. You've accused the police department of a conflict of interest, of mishandling a rape kit, of numerous other nefarious things without an iota of proof. The council's asking you to basically provide the proof, and you're presenting it as if you're being attacked. We're trying to protect the good name and integrity of a police department and of this city, and you act in the capacity of a city council member, and that's the grave concern here. So I'm not going to sustain your assertion because I think you've kind of turned it around or upside down. Councilmember Holloway, continue.
Continue. A high level of distrust concerning animosity toward and disrespect for, and I quote from the letter, Snoqualmie City Administration, Mayor, and City Council, unquote. As council is aware, this is just the latest in a litany of actions and statements in demonstration of animosity toward the council. We started this council meeting with a statement accusing council members of negligence of duty. Further, the misrepresentation or ignorance of facts and the incorporation of events having no bearing demonstrates the council members' ongoing detrimental contribution to the actions of the council and the potential impact to the citizens we represent. The council administration for 2 years has gone to exceptional lengths to facilitate this council member's hunt for evil, with the hope that in finding the contrary and in the eventual light of understanding, respect, and joint work on behalf of those we represent might result. But facts are ignored in the consumption of disrespect and animosity, in my opinion. As such, I feel it's ill-advised for this council to request this council member to represent it in any liaison position. Councilmember Shepherd currently represents the council in the Snoqualmie Watershed Forum. I am putting forward no position in regards to Councilmember Shepherd's committee membership. This would be a different set of considerations and a higher bar, as that representation is on behalf of the community. Therefore, I move to remove Councilmember Shepherd's responsibility as Snoqualmie Council representative on the Snoqualmie Watershed Forum and request Mayor Pro Tem to bring before the council a recommendation for a new council member for that representation as is time-wise convenient. May I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion, a second, as stated by Councilor Holloway. Any discussion on the motion? If everybody could put their hands down for one moment, just put your hands down, and then I'll ask if there's any questions on this, because I can't tell which hands are up for the general discussion or for the motion. All hands down, please.
My hand is up for the motion.
All right. Okay. Are there any questions on the motion? Councilor Lissay, or comments? And then Councilor Mayhew. Councilor Lissay, go ahead.
While I respect the council member's right to bring such a motion forward and having received a second, I do wish to implore the council to consider the statement made by Councilmember Shepherd first in detail. In some ways, I feel that quick judgment can be detrimental as a long drawn out discussion. However, I feel that taking any action tonight, any action with everything still raw and trying to understand intent, I'd encourage you to not move forward with the motion on the table.
Chair, may I respond?
Let's take some further comments. I'll come back and round robin, Councilor Holloway. Councilor Mayhew.
So while I certainly understand and most likely agree with Councilmember Holloway's motion, I think for tonight, I think it would be better to separate out concerns about the council and what we all think of each other. I think that is while it matters and it's important to me, is far less important to me than correcting the record where we have false statements out in the public domain. I think it is very important for the council to take a position very clearly on false statements. If we believe statements to be false, I believe we should take the appropriate action on those. So regard to the motion on the table, I move to postpone to our next meeting consideration of this, of the motion on the table.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to motion to postpone, stated by Councilor Mayhew. Any discussion on that? Councilor Jeans, you have your hand up. I don't know if you want to, and Councilor Holloway.
No, actually, it's partially on the matter before us now. When Peggy started this, she said she was reading a statement, and it was hard for me to follow her statement. And I think she was interjecting comments about the statement that she was making. And I think it was hard for me to understand whether she was interpolating what Councilmember Mayhew said, or whether she was quoting what Councilmember Mayhew said. So that's a long-winded way of me asking Councilmember Shepherd to submit that statement that she made this evening to the record so that I can study what she said.
Thank you, Councilor Jeans. Councilor Holloway.
So we have had 2 years with warrants pulled off consent agenda for no logical reason. Search yourself for your opinion. The question I am asking you tonight is, are you comfortable with Councilmember Shepherd representing you, not the city of Snoqualmie, you, the council, on the watershed forum? Make your decision.
All right, I don't see any further hands or discussion up on this particular item. So again, this is like a baby dinosaur and now a tiny dinosaur or grandbaby. So we're voting on the motion to postpone, and then we'll go back to Councilor Holloway's motion. So motion to postpone Councilor Holloway's motion until next council meeting. All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed?
No.
Nay.
Yeah, I heard 2 nays. Were they? I heard Councilmember Shepherd and Councilmember Holloway nay. Were there any more nays? The motion's been approved. So there's a motion to basically postpone your motion until 2 weeks from now, Councilmember Holloway, which effectively, unless the city attorney and the city clerk want to weigh in on Robert Rules of Order, it seems to leave us without further discussion your motion at this time. Are you satisfied with that or fine with that?
That's correct, Mayor. I was just came up on screen in case there were Robert's rules pertaining to that.
Thank you, Bob. All right, so Councilor Holloway will retain that motion and pick it up next meeting.
As long as Bob is now on screen, can he address the point that the Civil Service Commission not compliant with state law?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Bob, there were a multitude of points that Councilor Shepherd made in that regard. Yeah, if you could respond to whatever you remembered.
Well, and I think I have responded to the Civil Service Chair or the prior chair who recently left the commission, and I think I've responded to Councilmember Shepherd on this point as well. The Civil Service Commission rules expressly allow the commission to cancel a meeting if there's no business, and that is what was happening, so it's in compliance with the commission rules. There were a number of other questions that have been raised about things that are said in the statute, but the statutes for both civil service for fire and police say that the statutes have no application. That's the term, the phrase used in the statute. If a jurisdiction has adopted its own ordinances and Civil Service Commission rules, it substantially accomplished the purposes of the statute. The council has previously adopted Civil Service Commission ordinances. The commission has adopted its rules. The rules themselves expressly state that they substantially accomplished the purposes of the statute. And therefore, the rules govern, not the provisions of the statute. We've had this conversation, as I said, a number of times. And so the allegations that somehow the city is acting illegally because it's not following every jot and tittle of the statute, in my opinion, don't have merit. And I've tried to answer those questions for the commission and the council members when they have arisen within the last 6 months.
Right. Thank you, Bob. I'll go with Councilmember Mayhew, then Lassay, and then Shepherd.
So, council members, I don't know what each of you heard. I heard evidence refuting one of the 5 items that were raised. The specific I heard was that Councilmember Shepherd's email was sent before the date that the council received a briefing on the matter. That's easy enough to just verify, and then that I would consider. My point of view is that concern is satisfied and no longer exists. But I did not hear evidence for any of the other 4 concerns. If the council members are of like mind, then an action that we could take, and if someone was inclined to make a motion, an action that we could take would be to censure Councilmember Shepherd for false statements, state for the record what the or state for the record that those are false statements, and censure Councilmember Shepherd for having made them. And if that is the path that the council would like to go, if there was a motion to have a censure prepared and brought to our next meeting, that could be accomplished.
Councilmember Lassay, then Shepherd, and then Holloway.
Thank you, Mayor. While listening to Councilmember Shepherd's statement, I too, as Councilmember Jeans mentioned, it was sometimes hard to follow which things were quoted and which things were attributed to others. I would encourage Councilmember Shepherd to submit that statement for the record so that we can look at it. I also I want to show a level of trust with my fellow council members, and it's difficult to do that when council members make statements that cannot be based in fact. And if there are facts, and I'm hearing that the explanation is that there are facts, I would again encourage Councilmember Shepherd to enter into an executive session and share those facts with the council. Those facts can be kept in confidence, as executive sessions are, and we can understand what those are. Those council members have a duty not to share that information. Council members have a duty to keep that information private amongst the council and those that participate in those executive sessions. If there are those facts, I would like to hear them so that I can understand where these statements have come from, so that if there is a basis in them, that will weigh heavily on what decision I have made. I'd like to also then just state that in the previous council discussions regarding this issue, I reacted quite harshly towards Councilmember Shepherd. And unfortunately, I have heard nothing that changes that opinion. I need to hear some things that say why you are attacking the character of council members, why you are attacking the character of our police department, and then by extension, attacking the character of our citizens. There needs to be more information. I don't have enough right now to make a judgment.
All right, Councilmember Shepherd, then Councilmember Holloway. Councilmember Shepherd, perhaps you could at least answer the question as to whether you're willing to submit your written statement.
Well, first I would like to make the comment, the reason I raised my hand. The reason I raised my hand had to do with the Civil Service Commission and respond to Bob Sturbank. He says that the reason that we don't have to follow the RCW Civil Service Commission or Civil Service rules is because we have our own rules written into our code, but our code refers back to the RCW that is originally established. So it's kind of a, what do you call it, a circular reference. And so basically, even though we have something that talks about the Civil Service Commission, it refers back to the main requirements that is set out in RCW. And then your other question, Mayor, I'm sorry, I forgot.
A couple of council members have requested you to submit your statement, your written statement to the city clerk so it could be distributed to this council for further study. Are you willing to do that?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Holloway and Councilmember Ross.
Well, Jim, you need to stop me if this goes wrong, but I do feel some facts do need to be stated out of this discussion. So the police department was requested by a store in North Bend to help them with some loss prevention activities. That store identified an individual leaving the store as potentially not having paid for an item that individual was taking out. The police department intervened, got that individual, continued further discussion with the store to find out that individual had actually purchased the item. At that stage, the situation was over. The Chief Phipps at that time made engagement with that family over a year ago, and that issue was addressed. With the latest context, it came up again. Chief Phipps has engaged with that family again and with their church in a discussion about this, given the current context. So to say that the city is not engaging and not doing anything is falsely wrong and misrepresenting what's going on. Two, you just heard from the city attorney that we are following RCW, that it does give the individual cities leeway to do their own thing. Okay, so the city of Snoqualmie is not breaking the law, and the other cities inside Washington State are not breaking the law in regards to this. If you're not taking attorney's advice, help, God bless you, have fun. And the other part that was also not mentioned tonight was bringing into the discussion facts of an HR director in California one time having an interaction with police, which had no bearing in the discussion of Snoqualmie or the interaction with his family, and not specifying that it was non-germane. Total misrepresentation of what was going on your behalf, representing this council and the community. I'm done.
I would just quickly add, and perhaps Perry could weigh in. Although, again, as Councilor Holloway said, this incident with the Saldana family happened over a year ago and came up recently. When they raised it again and it came to Chief Phipps' attention, he immediately reached out to him. It was actually not him, it was the captain that had talked to them a year ago. Chief Phipps had never had an opportunity to speak to them until recently. He immediately reached out to them. As far as I recall, and perhaps he could confirm, he reached out prior to the time, or prior to the email from Councilmember Shepherd. And so again, she perhaps wasn't aware of what the police department was doing, but you're not being aware doesn't mean you can make assertions of fact when you haven't even checked with the police chief or the police department to determine what actions they're taking. Councilmember Ross and then Councilmember Mayhew.
So when I think about what our residents expect from council members, they expect a council member to demonstrate honesty and integrity in every action and statement, to inspire public confidence in our city government, to work for the common good, not personal interest, to respect the proper roles of elected officials and city staff, ensuring an open and effective government, and to disagree agreeably and professionally, and work together as a body, modeling teamwork and civility for our community. The email you sent stated you're ashamed of the Snoqualmie City Administration, Mayor, City Council, and Snoqualmie Police Department Administration. I have no clue why you were ashamed of any of the entities. And this goes against every element that our residents expect from city leaders. And so back to Councilmember Mayhew's comment, I would support a censor.
All right, Councilmember Mayhew and Councilmember Shepherd.
Yes, so I would just point out to my fellow council members this, which is Councilmember Shepherd doesn't need to like me. She doesn't need to like me at all. That's not a requirement to do her job. She can have intense dislike for me. That is entirely appropriate. And as a private citizen, as Councilmember Jeans pointed out, she has First Amendment rights to communicate that. So I think we must stay clear in our minds about what it is that bothers us. I think Councilmember Holloway's point that when we act as liaisons for the council, we have to have, that if we have contempt for the entire council, that may be an issue. That's an issue for another day. Sometimes I think Councilmember Sundwall is a complete nut job. But some days I think he's got his head screwed on right, and I say those things publicly, and it's okay. Maybe I shouldn't have said it now, but I was just sort of trying to make a point. That the things that were in the email that went out to Councilmember Shepherd and that she responded tonight were statements not about whether she likes me or anyone else. Well, she's perfectly entitled, in my opinion, to have those views and to express them in appropriate cases. But when she makes statements, if she makes statements that are false about our city, that is where the matters that I think Councilmember Ross was just listing out become an issue. As council members, when we're acting in our official capacity, we must not make false statements, certainly not if we've been without regard for their truth or if we know them not to be true. We mustn't do that. And when that happens, I think the rest of the council has a duty to correct the public record and to call that out, to censure it. So I would encourage us to focus not on things that might upset us personally. I would encourage us to set those aside for another time to deal with, and we can talk about who can be a liaison or not. We're probably all going to agree on that, but that's a lesser matter. I think we have a duty to our city to correct false statements about our police department. And to be clear, none of the 4 items, there's sort of this discussion about this very unfortunate incident regarding a teen that was stopped by our police department. You know what? I'll reveal to you all that when I was a teen, I was stopped by a police department in very similar circumstances. Now I'm a different person than the person that was stopped. It's very unfortunate when these things happen. It's very upsetting. I have tremendous sympathy for that family, and I'm very pleased that Chief Phipps has gone and spent the time with that family, and I don't want us to do anything to take away from that. So I think we need to focus on these. If we believe false statements have been made, then let's call that out in a censure, and let's correct the public record, and let's censure Councilmember Shepherd for having done that and ask her not to do that any further. But let's not mix that with other things. So if we want to go forward with the censure, as I just heard, unless I hear a disagreement from several of you, I will bring you a censure document 2 weeks from now. You'll have had a chance to read Councilmember Shepherd's written response. I suggest we take it up then and then either decide to correct the public record via censure or decide to do something else.
All right, thank you, Councilor May. I was going to suggest probably you put that in the form of a motion to save time and bring some closure this evening. Otherwise, we could go on forever. But I think the way you framed it was probably even more expeditious. And that is just say, is there anyone who protests Councilor Mayhew working with the city attorney to prepare a censure for the next council meeting? Is anybody opposed?
My hand's up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know if the hands were up. Go ahead, Peggy. Councilor Shepherd.
I'm opposed to it.
Okay. Councilor Sumwell?
Move to adjourn.
Okay, so we'll take it as a majority wants to have a censure prepared, and a motion's been made to adjourn. I haven't heard a second on the adjourn.
Second.
All right, motion a second to adjourn tonight's meeting. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? All right. Motion is carried. Everybody have a good evening. Right.